5,000 years ago, in the riverlands between the Tigris and the Euphrates, someone pressed a reed stylus into wet clay and left behind a question that has never completely gone silent. Why do human beings suffer? Not simply why do bodies weaken? Why do fevers rise? Why do wounds rot? Or why does breath one day vanish from the chest? The deeper question was more disturbing. Why does suffering seem to belong to human life from the very beginning? Why does every person carry, somewhere inside the body, the possibility of collapse? The ancient scribes of Mesopotamia did not write about disease the way a modern doctor would. They did not separate the human body from the divine world, from the dead, from fate, from ritual, from the anger of gods, or from invisible powers moving through the night. To them, illness was never only illness. A fever could be a symptom, but it could also be a message. A wasting sickness could be a natural condition, but it could also be the touch of a demon, the consequence of a forgotten offering, the punishment of a god, or the arrival of something that had been waiting unseen. And that is where the mystery begins, because in Mesopotamian thought, the human body was not imagined as an independent machine. It was fragile clay, animated by divine intention, surrounded by forces too old and too powerful to resist. The same civilization that built temples rising above the plains also imagined human life as something exposed, watched, judged, and limited. To exist was to stand inside a world where heaven had authority over flesh. Picture the scene: a city at dawn, mud brick walls glowing red beneath the first sunlight, smoke rising from temple offerings, priests moving through courtyards with bowls, oil, water, and incense, farmers walking toward canals, mothers carrying children through narrow streets. Somewhere, behind a thick wall, a scribe sits in the dim light and copies words from an older tablet onto new clay. The signs are small. The message is enormous. Human beings are not safe. This does not mean the ancient texts say that the gods placed one single disease inside every person in the way a modern headline might imagine. Archaeologists have not found a tablet that states, plainly and literally, that one hidden medical illness was inserted into the entire human race. That would be a false claim. But the texts do reveal something more haunting. They show a world in which sickness, death, weakness, and fate were woven into the human condition so deeply that they seemed almost part of creation itself. What if the disease was not one illness? What if it was the condition of being human? The Sumerians and later Mesopotamian peoples lived close to danger. Floods could erase fields. Drought could empty granaries. A city could rise for centuries and then fall into dust. Infants died. Kings died. Priests died. The strong became weak. The beautiful became old. No wall, no offering, no royal title could completely protect a person from the moment when the body betrayed itself. But instead of treating this as random misfortune, Mesopotamian religion searched for meaning. It asked whether suffering had an origin. It asked who controlled it. It asked whether the gods allowed disease, sent disease, removed disease, or used disease to remind humans of their place. And the answers were not simple. Some texts speak of gods creating humans to perform labor, to carry the burdens that divine beings no longer wish to carry. Some myths describe humans as necessary, useful, even beloved in moments. Other traditions show the gods becoming disturbed by human noise, human growth, human disorder. In those stories, plague does not appear as a medical accident. It appears as a divine instrument. This is one of the most unsettling ideas in Mesopotamian literature. Disease can awaken when the boundary between humans and gods is disturbed, not because every sick person has done something wrong, not because ancient people lacked compassion. Their healing rituals show the opposite. They feared suffering and tried desperately to relieve it. But their world was moral, cosmic, and supernatural all at once. Illness belonged to a larger pattern, a hidden order that humans could sense but never fully control. A person might ask, "Why am I sick?" A priest might ask, "Which god has turned away?" An exorcist might ask, "What unseen power has entered?" A scribe might ask, "Is this fate?" And fate had a name. In later Mesopotamian traditions, one of the most feared figures associated with death and disease was Namtar, a being whose name is connected with destiny, fate, and the decree that cannot easily be escaped. Namtar was not simply a monster in the modern sense. He belonged to a terrifying category of divine messenger, a force that could carry the decision of the underworld into the living body. Imagine believing that sickness was not only happening inside you, but arriving with authority. That thought changes everything. It turns the body into a battlefield. It turns pain into a sign. It turns the sickbed into a place where gods, demons, ghosts, ancestors, rituals, and destiny all gather invisibly around one human being. But the Mesopotamian world was not hopeless. That is another important part of the mystery. If disease could be sent, perhaps it could be removed. If a demon could enter, perhaps it could be expelled. If a god was angry, perhaps the god could be appeased. If fate had been spoken, perhaps another divine power could be persuaded to soften it. This is why ancient Mesopotamia produced not only myths of suffering, but also prayers, incantations, purification rites, diagnostic tablets, offerings, and healing ceremonies. The people did not simply surrender to illness. They fought it with every tool they believed the universe had given them. A healer might examine symptoms. A ritual expert might recite sacred words. Water might be poured. Oil might be applied. Figurines might be buried or destroyed. The sick person might confess unknown sins, even if they did not know what offense had caused the suffering. The ritual did not treat the body as separate from the soul, the family, the house, the city, or the gods. Everything was connected, and this connection may be the key to understanding the ancient mystery hidden behind the title. When we say the gods place disease inside every human being, we must be careful. The texts do not give us a simple biological doctrine. They give us something older, stranger, and perhaps more powerful. They give us a vision of humanity as created vulnerable, living under divine decree, always carrying the possibility that the invisible world may suddenly become visible through pain. The disease awakens when flesh remembers its limits. It awakens in fever, in fear, in aging, in grief, in guilt, in the first realization that life is temporary. It awakens when a person who felt whole yesterday suddenly becomes fragile today. It awakens when the body becomes a message no one knows how to read. And perhaps that is why these clay tablets still disturb us. They come from a world of temples, gods, demons, and kings. Yet the question inside them has never disappeared. Modern medicine can name viruses, bacteria, tumors, inflammation, genetic disorders, and neurological decline. It can explain mechanisms the ancient scribes could not have imagined. But even now, when suffering arrives, human beings still ask a question older than science. Why me? The Sumerian and Mesopotamian texts do not answer that question with certainty. They preserve a struggle. They show humanity standing between creation and destruction, between divine need and divine anger, between healing and fate. They suggest that the oldest civilizations did not see disease as an interruption of human life, but as one of the terrifying truths built into it. And if the first scribes were not merely describing sickness, but trying to understand why every human body carries the shadow of its own ending, then what were they really warning us about? Why would the gods fear the sound of human life? In one of the most haunting traditions from ancient Mesopotamia, humanity does not first become a problem because of evil, rebellion, violence, or forbidden knowledge. Humanity becomes a problem because it multiplies. People spread across the land. Villages become towns. Towns become cities. Work songs rise from fields. Hammers strike. Children cry. Animals move through crowded streets. The world fills with human sound. And in the divine realm, the gods can no longer sleep. This idea appears most famously in the Akkadian flood tradition known as the Atrahasis epic. It is not purely Sumerian in the narrow linguistic sense, but it preserves older Mesopotamian themes that grew out of the same cultural world of southern Iraq, where Sumerian religious ideas, city traditions, and divine names shaped later Babylonian literature. The story is not a medical tablet. It is not a hospital record. It is a mythic account of why human beings exist, why they suffer, and why the gods might turn against the very creatures they allowed to live. The mystery begins with divine labor. In the story, the lower gods are exhausted from digging canals, maintaining the earth, and carrying out the heavy work required to keep the world functioning. They grow tired. They complain. They rebel. The divine order is disturbed. The gods need a solution, and the solution is humanity. Humans are made to take up the labor. This is one of the most important ideas in Mesopotamian creation thought. Human beings are not created as rulers of the earth in the modern heroic sense. They are created as workers, servants, maintainers of divine order. Their task is to feed the gods through offerings, sustain temples, cultivate land, and keep civilization moving. The human world exists in relationship to the divine world. Fields, temples, animals, canals, songs, prayers, and sacrifices all belong to the same arrangement. But then something unexpected happens. The solution becomes a disturbance. Humanity grows. The population expands. The sound of human life rises so loudly that the great god Enlil is troubled. He cannot rest. The noise becomes unbearable. And here the story takes a dark turn. The gods do not first send a flood. They send plague. That detail matters. Before the great waters come, disease arrives as an instrument of reduction. The sickness is not random. It is sent into the human world because humanity has become too numerous, too loud, too impossible to ignore. In the mythic imagination, plague is not merely a biological event. It is a divine response to excess. What kind of world produces such a story? Ancient Mesopotamia was built on both abundance and fragility. The rivers made agriculture possible, but they were unpredictable. Irrigation created wealth, but it also demanded constant labor and social organization. Cities depended on grain, animals, workers, administrators, priests, merchants, and scribes. Civilization was powerful, but it was never stable. Too little water meant famine. Too much water meant destruction. Crowding could bring sickness. Political conflict could break supply lines. A prosperous city could become vulnerable very quickly. So, when ancient people imagined plague as a divine tool, they were not inventing fear from nothing. They lived in a world where disease could pass through households, weaken workers, empty streets, and silence festivals. They saw sickness not as a private inconvenience, but as a force that could change the fate of an entire city. But the Atrahasis tradition adds something more psychologically disturbing. It suggests that human existence itself can become too much. Not human sin. Exactly. Not human disobedience in the simple sense. Human presence, human growth, human noise. The very success of creation becomes the reason for punishment. That is why the story still feels unsettling. It does not only ask why bad people suffer, it asks why life, when it expands, begins to attract destruction. And then comes the strange mercy. The god Enki, known in Sumerian tradition as a wise and cunning deity associated with freshwater, wisdom, craft, and hidden knowledge, does not simply abandon humanity. In the Atrahasis story, he finds indirect ways to warn and help. When plague threatens the people, human survival depends not on strength, weapons, or kingship, but on secret instruction. Divine knowledge becomes the medicine. This creates a tension at the heart of Mesopotamian religion. One divine power sends destruction, another preserves life. The gods are not presented as a single unified moral voice. They argue, they disagree, they make plans, conceal intentions, break expectations, and act through intermediaries. For the ancient audience, this was not necessarily contradiction in the modern sense. It reflected a universe where power was divided, where fate was negotiated among beings greater than humans, and where survival depended on knowing which divine presence might listen. What if disease, in this story, is not only punishment? What if disease is a warning that the balance between heaven and earth has failed? In the world of the Atrahasis epic, plague awakens when humans cross an invisible threshold. They do not see the line. They do not know the moment when their songs become noise, when their growth becomes offense, when their existence becomes a burden to the divine order. The danger is not that humanity chooses the wrong path with full understanding. The danger is that the rule is hidden. This is why the story feels so ancient and so modern at the same time. Human beings still fear invisible thresholds. We fear the disease already spreading before symptoms appear. We fear the decision made in a room we cannot enter. We fear systems too large for one person to understand. We fear that life can change because a hidden limit has been crossed. For the Mesopotamian scribe, the clay tablet did not simply preserve a tale, it preserved a pattern. Human beings are created to serve life, but life becomes excessive. The gods desire order, but human growth creates disorder. Disease enters not as an accident, but as a force that reveals how fragile the arrangement always was. And notice the emotional cruelty of the plague motif. A flood is visible. Storm clouds gather. Rivers rise. The sky darkens. But disease is intimate. It enters the house. It touches the child. It burns inside the skin. It separates breath from breath. A flood destroys the land from outside. Plague makes the body itself the place of disaster. That may be why the image is so powerful. The gods do not only strike the world, they strike the human vessel. The sickness becomes a message written in flesh. Yet the story refuses to end in simple despair. Humans can appeal. Ritual can matter. Wisdom can intervene. Enki can whisper through forbidden channels. The divine order may be dangerous, but it is not entirely closed. There is always the possibility that someone, somewhere, knows the hidden instruction that can delay destruction. But a more frightening question remains. If the gods once sent plague because humanity became too loud, What happens when the silence they wanted finally arrives? What if disease was not only something a person caught, but something a person was assigned? In Mesopotamian thought, one of the most unsettling names connected with sickness, death, and destiny is Namtar. The name itself carries the weight of fate, decree, and appointed outcome. Namtar is not simply a creature that attacks at random. He appears in later Mesopotamian tradition as a messenger, a minister, a force of the underworld, and a carrier of decisions that come from beyond human control. This is where illness becomes more terrifying than pain. Pain can be endured. A fever can be cooled. A wound can be wrapped. But fate is different. Fate suggests that something has been spoken over a life before the sufferer understands it. It suggests that the body may be obeying a command issued somewhere unseen. To enter this world, imagine a sick room in an ancient Mesopotamian city. The walls are made of mud brick. A lamp burns low. The air smells of oil, smoke, sweat, and dust. A person lies on a reed mat, breathing shallowly. Family members whisper nearby. They have brought water. They have brought food. They have called a ritual specialist. Someone has asked which god has been offended. Someone else wonders whether a ghost is involved. Another fears that a curse has found its target. But beneath all these fears is a deeper one. What if this illness has a name in the divine world? What if the sickness is not confusion, but delivery? Namtar belongs to that frightening imagination. In mythological and ritual traditions, he is linked with the underworld and with the execution of decrees. In some accounts, he serves the great queen of the dead, Ereshkigal. In others, he is associated with plague-like power, a being capable of bringing affliction into the living world. He does not need to be understood as a modern biological explanation. He represents something older and more symbolic. The idea that death and disease may arrive as agents of an order humans cannot resist. The ancient Mesopotamians did not think of fate as a vague feeling. Fate could be pronounced. It could be fixed. It could be written into the structure of existence by divine authority. Kings received destinies. Cities received destinies. Temples received destinies. Human beings lived beneath destinies that could be favorable, dangerous, shortened, extended, or darkened by divine will. So when a figure like Namtar appears, the question changes. The sufferer no longer asks only, "What is happening to my body?" The sufferer asks, "Who has decided this?" That question creates a spiritual pressure almost impossible to escape. It means sickness can become evidence of a hidden court. Somewhere beyond sight, a judgment may have occurred. Somewhere in the divine order, a decree may have been released. The human body becomes the place where that invisible decision becomes visible. And yet, Mesopotamian texts do not reduce every illness to one explanation. This is important. Their world contained many possible causes: divine anger, demonic attack, impurity, ghosts of the dead, witchcraft, broken oaths, neglected rituals, bad omens, and natural vulnerability. A healer or exorcist had to interpret signs. Symptoms mattered. Dreams mattered. Timing mattered. The body was read like a tablet. Could disease be a message? The ancient answer was often yes, but the message was not always clear. This uncertainty made sickness frightening. A person could suffer without knowing the offense. A family could perform rituals without knowing whether the correct power had been addressed. A priest could recite words inherited from older tradition, trusting that sacred speech might reach the unseen place where the problem began. Namtar's power lies in this uncertainty. He is not merely a villain. He is the personification of the moment when life feels no longer negotiable. He stands at the place where medicine becomes prayer, where symptom becomes omen, where the sufferer feels that the body has been claimed by something beyond persuasion. But there is a strange paradox in Mesopotamian religion. Even fate was not always treated as completely silent. Rituals existed because people believed the divine world could still be approached. Prayers existed because anger might be cooled. Incantations existed because harmful powers might be expelled. Offerings existed because relationship with the gods could be restored. Laments existed because grief could be carried into sacred language. The very presence of healing traditions means that ancient people did not imagine themselves as helpless puppets. They lived inside tension. Fate was powerful, but appeal was possible. Decrees were terrifying, but divine mercy could still be sought. Namtar could carry death, but ritual specialists still tried to block, redirect, or delay the arrival of destructive forces. This tension is what gives the Mesopotamian view of disease its emotional depth. It is not simple fatalism. It is not simple superstition. It is a dramatic world where every illness opens a doorway into cosmic uncertainty. The body becomes the meeting place of fate and resistance. And here, the title's mystery becomes sharper. If every human being carries an appointed end, then the hidden disease may not be fever, plague, or infection. It may be Namtar itself, the destiny of mortality. The decree that every body, no matter how strong, beautiful, royal, wise, or sacred, must eventually be touched by decline. In that sense, disease is not outside the human story. It is the messenger reminding the living that they are not gods. The kings of Mesopotamia knew this. Their inscriptions boast of victories, walls, temples, canals, and divine favor. But no king could remove the final decree. The strongest ruler could command armies, but not breath itself. The temple could rise high above the city, but the grave remained below. Namtar stands between those two worlds. Above, the gods pronounce. Below, the dead gather. Between them, human beings live for a time, pretending that the decree is distant, until the body begins to speak in a language no one wants to hear. A chill, a cough, a weakness in the limbs, a dream of the dead, a pain that does not leave, a shadow at the edge of the room. To a modern mind, these are symptoms. To an ancient mind, they could also be footsteps. The terrifying question is not whether Namtar exists as a physical being in the way a literal monster would. The deeper question is why the Mesopotamians gave fate a presence, a name, and a role. Why did they imagine destiny not as an idea, but as something that comes for the body? Perhaps because death never feels abstract when it arrives. And if fate itself could walk into the room as a messenger of the underworld, who could tell whether an illness was merely sickness or the first knock of the decree no human being can refuse? Could the first human body have been created already carrying weakness? In one of the most unusual Sumerian compositions, the act of creation does not appear as a perfect moment of divine artistry. It appears as a troubling experiment. The text known today as Enki and Ninmah tells a story involving gods, birth, clay, drinking, wisdom, and bodies that do not function in ordinary ways. It does not read like a modern medical explanation. It does not say disease began through germs or inherited defects, but it does place human vulnerability near the mystery of creation itself. That is what makes it so powerful. The story opens in a divine setting where the gods are concerned with labor and the burden of sustaining the world. The mother goddess, often identified as Ninma in this composition, takes part in forming human beings. Enki, the wise god of freshwater, craft, intelligence, and hidden knowledge is central to the drama. Human creation is linked with clay, divine intention, and the practical needs of the gods. But the account does something unexpected. It does not only ask how humans were made, it asks what happens when bodies are made imperfect. In the story, after drinking beer, Ninma shapes several human beings with different bodily conditions or limitations. The details are difficult and must be handled carefully, because the text comes from a world with very different assumptions from our own. Modern readers should not treat these ancient descriptions as compassionate medical categories. They are mythological images, shaped by ancient ideas about usefulness, labor, dependency, and social place. Yet the pattern is striking. Ninma creates bodies that seem unable to perform expected roles. Enki responds by assigning each person a place in society. One who cannot bend the hands may still serve the king. One who cannot see may become a musician. One with other limitations may still be given food, shelter, or a social function. The exact translation and interpretation of some lines remain debated, but the larger idea is clear enough. Bodily difference is placed inside a creation story, not outside it. Why would an ancient text do that? One possibility is that the story explores divine wisdom. Enki's power is not merely the ability to create perfect beings. His wisdom appears in finding order, role, and meaning even where the body seems broken. In that reading, the text is not simply about defect. It is about the terrifying and necessary work of placing fragile human lives within a livable world. But there is another layer. The story also stages a contest. Ninma creates. Enki assigns. Later, Enki creates a being so helpless that Ninma struggles to find a role for it. The creature is often understood as a figure of extreme weakness, possibly an infant-like or severely impaired being, depending on interpretation. In this reversal, Ninma faces the limit of her own creative challenge. The question becomes sharper. Can every human form be given a place? This is not a minor mythological puzzle. It cuts directly into the ancient fear of the body. A human being is clay animated by divine power, yet clay can crack, breath can fail, limbs can weaken, sight can vanish, speech can disappear. The very material of humanity is unstable. Ancient Mesopotamians knew this not from theory, but from daily life. Childbirth was dangerous. Infancy was dangerous. Work was dangerous. Infection was dangerous. Malnutrition, injury, fever, and disability were part of the visible human world. A body could be born fragile, become fragile, or be made fragile by accident, age, punishment, or fate. So a creation story that includes bodily limitation is not abstract. It reflects a civilization asking how imperfection fits into a universe ruled by gods. Did the gods make humans weak by mistake? Did weakness appear through divine play? Was vulnerability part of the design? The text does not answer in the clean way a philosopher might want. It dramatizes the question. It brings divine beings into a scene where creation and limitation cannot be separated. Bodies are made, named, judged, assigned, challenged. The myth turns vulnerability into a sacred problem. For a documentary viewer, this is where the phrase, "the disease inside every human," must be understood symbolically and responsibly. The Sumerian text does not say that all humans contain one hidden sickness waiting to awaken, but it does show that the human body, from the beginning of mythic imagination, was not treated as invincible. Mortality, weakness, dependence, and limitation were already part of the ancient conversation about what humans are. That is more haunting than a single disease. A single disease might be cured. A specific plague might pass. A wound might close. But vulnerability is different. Vulnerability is not an event. It is a condition. The human body is a temporary agreement between clay and breath. At first, that agreement feels stable. A child runs through a courtyard. A worker lifts baskets of earth. A singer raises a hymn in the temple. A king stands before a statue of a god. A mother grinds grain at sunrise. The body seems obedient. It seems present. It seems like possession. Then one day, the agreement changes. The hand trembles. The eye dims. The back bends. The voice weakens. The memory fails. The child becomes feverish. The strong man cannot rise. The old woman dreams of relatives long dead. For the Mesopotamian imagination, such moments did not happen in a godless universe. They revealed the fragility that had always been there. The body was never independent. It had always depended on forces outside itself. Water, food, breath, blessing, ritual protection, family care, divine tolerance. This may explain why Enki and Ninmah remained so unsettling. It brings us into a world where even gods must confront the consequences of making bodies. Creation is not simply glorious. It is risky. To make a human is to make a being who can suffer. And that raises an uncomfortable thought. Perhaps the most frightening disease placed inside humanity was not plague, demon, curse, or punishment. Perhaps it was dependence itself. The fact that no human being can exist alone, heal alone, survive alone, or escape the limits of the clay form. The ancient world answered that dependence with households, temples, rituals, offerings, healers, songs, and stories. A fragile creature needed a network of visible and invisible support. A body needed bread, water, touch, prayer, and protection. The living needed the gods, even when the gods were frightening. But the clay body still carried its secret. It could be shaped beautifully and still break. It could be given a role and still suffer. It could serve the gods and still die. It could stand beneath the temple tower and still feel the first tremor of weakness rising from within. If human beings were formed from clay, and clay was always capable of cracking, then was the first illness not something that entered the body later, but something hidden in the material from which the body was made. What if the first great outbreak was not remembered as a number, but as a silence? No ancient Sumerian scribe left us a daily medical bulletin from the streets of Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, or Eridu. There is no surviving tablet that says, in modern language, a contagious disease spread through the population on this date. The evidence does not work that way. The ancient world rarely gives us clean reports. It gives us broken tablets, buried homes, temple ruins, graves, incantations, and myths that turn human fear into divine language. Yet the cities themselves whisper the problem. Civilization brought people together. That was its genius, and also its danger. The same canals that fed fields gathered workers into shared systems. The same markets that brought trade also brought contact. The same animals that sustained households lived close to human bodies. The same temples that organized society drew crowds for offerings, festivals, and distribution of food. A city is not only a place of walls. It is a place where breath is shared. In the alluvial plains of southern Mesopotamia, life depended on managing water. The rivers made grain possible. But irrigation also created marshes, standing pools, mud, insects, and dense agricultural zones. People lived near sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, dogs, donkeys, birds, and rodents. Grain storage attracted pests. Waste accumulated in crowded neighborhoods. Drinking water could be contaminated. Injuries from labor could become infected. Childbirth could turn deadly. Fevers could move through families before anyone understood why. Modern archaeology can identify some conditions of ancient urban life, but it cannot always diagnose the exact diseases that moved through every city. Bones may show trauma, nutritional stress, infection, or chronic illness. Yet many deadly diseases leave little trace on skeletons. Soft tissue disappears. Epidemics can pass through a population without writing their names clearly into the archaeological record. So how did ancient people explain what they could feel but not see? They turned to a universe filled with powers. A cough might be more than a cough. A fever might be a hand from the unseen world. Sudden weakness might be the sign of a god's anger. A wasting illness might suggest the work of a demon, a curse, or the restless dead. This did not mean people lacked practical knowledge. Mesopotamian healers used plants, oils, bandages, minerals, diet, washing, and observation. But their medicine lived inside a sacred cosmos. Healing the body and restoring divine order belonged together. Picture a narrow street in a city after sunset. The day's heat still clings to the walls. A dog moves through refuse near a doorway. Somewhere a child cries with fever. In another house, an old man murmurs in sleep. A woman carries water from a jar, watching the faces of her family. She knows the signs. A neighbor became ill 2 days ago. A cousin stopped eating. Someone near the temple has already called an exorcist. No one speaks the word epidemic, but everyone feels the pattern. This is the terror of ancient disease. It awakens first as rumor. A name whispered beside a doorway. A missing worker. A closed house. A smell of smoke from purification rites. A sudden absence at the market. A priest called before dawn. A body washed too early in the day. How could a city built to preserve life become the place where sickness multiplies? The answer lies in the double nature of civilization. Mesopotamian cities were miracles of organization. They produced writing, accounting, temple administration, monumental building, long-distance trade, complex law, and refined literature. They also intensified human vulnerability. More people meant more labor and wealth, but also more crowding. More animals meant more food and transport, but also more proximity to infection. More canals meant more fields, but also more water-related hazards. The city gave humanity power, and then made humanity easier to wound. Ancient people may not have known microbes, but they knew contamination. They knew impurity. They knew that certain things had to be washed away, separated, burned, buried, or ritually neutralized. Mesopotamian ritual texts often treat danger as something that can cling to a person, a house, an object, or a community. In that sense, their language of impurity was not modern germ theory, but it carried a deep intuition. Invisible forces can move through contact, space, and disorder. A sick house was not merely a private space. It was a troubled boundary. Inside, the sufferer lay between life and death. Outside, the community watched with fear. The doorway itself became symbolic. Could the illness leave? Could something worse enter? Could the healer stand at the threshold and speak the right words? Could the gods be persuaded before the sickness spread? This is where ancient medicine and urban fear meet. A physician might prepare a remedy. An exorcist might recite an incantation. A family might offer food to a god or ancestor. Water might be poured over the patient's hands. Oil might be touched to the body. A figurine representing evil might be carried away. A ritual might transfer danger from flesh into clay, wool, dough, or another object that could be removed. To modernize, some of this belongs to religion, some to psychology, some to early medicine, and some to symbolic action. To the Mesopotamian mind, these categories were not separated. The illness had disturbed a world of relationships. The cure had to repair those relationships. But the frightening thing about city sickness is that it does not respect the meaning humans give it. One family may pray, another may wash, a priest may chant, a healer may apply medicine. Yet the fever moves from body to body with a logic no one can see. That invisible movement must have felt like intention. It must have seemed as though something was traveling through the city, choosing doors. Perhaps this is why disease could so easily become personalized in myth and ritual. A demon has a direction. A god has a will. A curse has a sender. A ghost has a grievance. Fate has a decree. These explanations made terror speakable. They gave form to the formless, because the most frightening enemy is not always the one with a face. Sometimes it is the thing that passes through a crowd and leaves only empty sleeping mats behind. The early city created a new kind of human experience collective vulnerability. A farmer alone in a field feared drought, flood, snakebite, injury, and hunger. A city feared something larger. It feared that the life of many bodies had become one body. When sickness entered one part, the whole organism trembled. The temple rose at the center, not only as a place of worship, but as a symbol of order against chaos. Its rituals helped the community imagine protection. Its gods watched over the storehouses, canals, fields, and people. But even a city with a great temple could hear sudden silence in its streets. That silence may be the first fever of civilization. Not one documented outbreak, not one named plague, a deeper awakening. The realization that when humans gather to become powerful, they also gather their weaknesses. The body's hidden fragility becomes social. One person's breath becomes another person's danger. One household's suffering becomes a city's fear. And if the gods were believed to govern order, impurity, fertility, and death, then how could sickness in the city ever be merely sickness? It had to mean something. It had to be read. It had to be answered. But what happens when the body of the city begins to fail, and every prayer sounds like it is rising from the same infected clay? Why would the gods create a being that could suffer, labor, pray, and die? The oldest Mesopotamian stories do not imagine humanity as an accident. Human beings are made for a purpose, but that purpose is not always comforting. In several creation traditions, humans enter the world because divine beings no longer want to bear the exhausting work of maintaining the earth. Canals must be dug, fields must be watered, food must be produced, offerings must be presented, temples must be sustained. The world requires labor, and someone must carry it. So the gods create humans. That idea is both magnificent and unsettling. Magnificent, because it places humanity inside a cosmic design. Humans matter. Their work matters. Their offerings matter. Their cities are not random piles of mud brick under a silent sky. Every basket of grain, every temple hymn, Every poured libation participates in a sacred economy between heaven and earth. Unsettling, because human beings are not made as equals to the gods. They are made to serve. This is one of the deepest tensions in Mesopotamian religion. Humans are necessary, but not sovereign, valued, but vulnerable. Close enough to the gods to feed them through ritual, yet distant enough to be punished, reduced, or forgotten. The human body becomes the tool through which divine order is maintained, but the tool itself is breakable. What if suffering entered the world because humans were created to carry burdens too heavy for clay? In mythic language, the gods needed workers. In historical reality, Mesopotamian civilization did too. The southern plains demanded organized effort. Irrigation canals did not maintain themselves. Silt had to be cleared. Embankments had to be repaired. Fields had to be measured. Grain had to be harvested, stored, counted, redistributed, and offered. Temple households became major economic institutions, and human labor was the foundation beneath their sacred grandeur. Imagine the temple from a distance. It rises above the city like a mountain made by hands. Its walls glow in the heat. Its platform seems to lift earth toward heaven. At its summit, the god is honored. Below, in storerooms and courtyards, workers carry jars. Animals are counted. Grain is measured. Wool is processed. Bread is baked. And scribes record the movement of goods. The god receives order. Humans produce it. To modern viewers, this may look like administration. To the ancient mind, it was worship. Labor and ritual were not opposites. Farming, building, offering, singing, and accounting all belonged to the same cosmic arrangement. A field could be sacred because it fed a temple. A worker could be part of divine service because the gods depended on offerings. A scribe writing numbers into clay was helping the invisible world remain connected to the visible one. But here is the hidden wound inside the system. A body made for labor eventually fails. Hands swell. Backs bend. Eyes weaken from dust and sun. Feet crack in mud. Skin burns. Hunger returns. Sleep is never enough. The worker who serves the god still becomes sick. The priest who recites the hymn still ages. The king who builds the temple still fears death. If the gods required human service, why did they not create servants who could endure forever? This question lives beneath the surface of Mesopotamian creation mythology. The texts do not always state it directly, but they circle around it. Humans are formed from earthly material. In some traditions, clay is central. In others, divine blood or divine intelligence enters the story. The result is a being caught between worlds made from lowly substance, touched by sacred power, capable of worship, yet doomed to decay. That mixture may be the true origin of human anguish. An animal suffers without building temples to explain suffering. A god may command without fearing old age, but a human being stands between animal and God. Humans can imagine eternity, but cannot possess it. They can serve the divine, but cannot become fully divine. They can name death, mourn death, ritualize death, and write about death, yet they cannot abolish death. Could consciousness itself be the burden assigned to clay? Mesopotamian texts often present humans as laborers. But the labor is not only physical. Humans must also remember. They remember offerings. They remember names of gods. They remember festivals. They remember royal deeds. They remember the dead. Writing itself becomes a tool against disappearance, a way for fragile beings to press memory into matter. A clay tablet is a strange answer to mortality. The human hand, temporary and trembling, writes on clay, which can outlive kingdoms. The body dies, but the sign remains. The scribe vanishes, but the wedge-shaped marks continue speaking. In that sense, Mesopotamian civilization built an entire culture around resisting the failure of flesh. Yet even writing cannot cure the body. It can preserve a prayer, but not the voice that first spoke it. It can list offerings, but not restore the animal that was sacrificed. It can name a king, but not return breath to his lungs. The tablet survives because the human does not. This creates a quiet tragedy inside the Mesopotamian imagination. Humans were made to maintain order, but they themselves are disorder waiting to happen. Their bodies require food, rest, protection, washing, healing, and burial. Their minds fear dreams, omens, guilt, and divine displeasure. Their communities require rituals to keep danger away. Every person created to serve the gods also creates new needs that must be managed. Humanity is useful, but unstable. Perhaps that is why the gods in these stories can appear both dependent on humans and irritated by them. They need offerings, but dislike noise. They require labor, but fear multiplication. They establish order, but unleash forces that reduce human life. This divine ambivalence is not a flaw in storytelling. It reflects the anxiety of a world where the same powers that bless the harvest can send drought, disease, or death. To live under such gods was to live in negotiation. A person did not simply believe. A person served, offered, feared, requested, confessed, purified, and waited. Religion was not a weekend idea. It was the structure that held daily life together. A missed ritual might matter. A broken oath might matter. A dream might matter. The gods were not distant symbols. They were authorities woven into weather, fertility, kingship, health, and survival, the disease inside humanity. Then, maybe the burden of being created for a purpose beyond oneself while trapped in a failing body. Humans must serve eternity with temporary hands. They must feed gods while fighting hunger. They must build temples while their bones weaken. They must praise divine order while living inside flesh that can collapse without warning. This is not a simple accusation against the gods. Mesopotamian literature is more complex than that. The gods create civilization, grant wisdom, establish kingship, offer protection, and make abundance possible. But they also remind humans that existence is conditional. Life is not owned. It is permitted, and permission can be withdrawn. That thought would have followed every ancient person. From the field worker to the palace scribe, the body belongs to the human for a while, but not absolutely. Breath comes and goes by powers beyond the individual. Health may feel personal, but it is surrounded by divine forces. The worker may serve faithfully, yet sickness can still arrive like a command from another realm. So the great question remains carved into the mud brick world of ancient Mesopotamia. Were humans created because the gods loved them, because the gods needed them, or because the universe required a fragile creature to carry the weight that even divine beings refused to bear? What if illness entered the body like an intruder crossing a doorway at night? In Mesopotamian healing traditions, disease was often imagined not only as a condition, but as an invasion. Something could seize a person. Something could cling to the skin. Something could enter the limbs, the belly, the head, the breath, the dreams. The sick body became a house under attack, and the healer's task was not simply to soothe pain, but to identify what had come inside. This is one of the most vivid differences between modern and ancient ways of speaking about sickness. Modern medicine often asks what mechanism is operating. Ancient Mesopotamian ritual texts often asked what power was present. A fever might be described through heat, weakness, and trembling, but the deeper question was personal and cosmic. Was it the hand of a god, the grip of a demon, the anger of a goddess, the revenge of a ghost? The work of sorcery, the stain of impurity. The body was not sealed. It had openings: eyes, ears, nostrils, mouth, skin, dreams, speech, touch, food, water, doorways, beds, roads, fields, temples, and graves could all become points of contact with danger. The human person was surrounded by boundaries, and every boundary could fail. Imagine a family at night in an ancient city. A child wakes crying, burning with fever. The mother touches the forehead and feels heat. The father opens the door and looks into the dark street. No enemy is visible. No wound is obvious. No animal has bitten the child. Yet something has changed inside the house. The normal order has broken. The family does not only fear the fever, they fear the invisible visitor. In Mesopotamian incantation literature, demons and harmful forces often appear as beings that move through lonely places, ruins, deserts, marshes, doorways, roofs, beds, or roads. Some are named, some are described by their effects. They may strike the head, bind the limbs, disturb sleep, steal breath, afflict pregnant women, attack infants, or follow a person from an impure place. They are not all identical. The ancient world had a crowded vocabulary of danger. Among the feared figures were beings such as Lamashtu, associated especially with threats to mothers and infants, and other hostile powers described in ritual texts as causes of illness or misfortune. These beings should not be treated as medical diagnoses. They belong to myth, ritual, and religious imagination. But they reveal how ancient people experienced sickness as a violation of the body's safety. Why did disease need a face? Because formless suffering is almost impossible to confront. A named demon can be addressed. A curse can be reversed. A ghost can be appeased. A god can be prayed to. An impurity can be washed away. A hostile power can be transferred into a substitute object and removed. Naming danger gives the sufferer a way to act. That is why Mesopotamian healing involved words as much as substances. The incantation was not decoration. It was a weapon. Sacred speech could command, plead, identify, expose, separate, or expel. The ritual specialist might speak as if pulling the illness out of the patient and sending it away to the steppe, the river, the underworld, or some distant place where it could no longer harm the living. A sickness might be told to leave. A demon might be threatened. A god might be invoked. A protective figure might be called to stand guard. The patient's body became a contested territory. Modern readers sometimes dismiss this as primitive superstition, but that misses the emotional intelligence of the system. When someone is sick, the sufferer often feels invaded. Pain does not feel like an abstract process. It feels like something has taken possession of one's life. Fever changes thought. Nightmares alter reality. Paralysis, breathlessness, convulsions, infection, and delirium can make the body feel occupied by a force that is not the self. Ancient Mesopotamian language gave form to that experience. It said, "Something has entered, and once something has entered, something must drive it out." This is why ritual space mattered. The sick person might be placed in a controlled setting: water, fire, oil, wool, flour, clay, reeds, plants, and figurines might be used as symbolic tools. The healer might draw boundaries around the body. The doorway might be purified. The bed might be treated. The house itself might become part of the cure. Could the illness be removed from flesh into an object? Many ancient rituals worked through this kind of transfer logic. A figurine could represent the evil. A substance could absorb impurity. A spoken formula could redirect danger. The harmful thing was not always fought directly. Sometimes it was displaced, carried away, buried, burned, broken, or sent into the wilderness. The gesture is psychologically powerful. It gives the patient and family something visible to watch. The hidden enemy becomes represented. The represented enemy can be handled. What cannot be seen is placed into clay, dough, wool, or image. Then it is removed from the human world. For a people who believed clay could receive writing, hold memory, and form bodies, clay could also receive danger. This brings the mystery deeper into the human form. If the body is like a house, then the disease inside every human being may be the possibility of entrance. The terrifying truth is not that one demon waits in every person. The texts do not say that. The truth is that every human body has thresholds. Every life can be crossed by forces it did not invite. A person can lock a door, but not the skin. A family can guard a house, but not dreams. A city can build walls, but not keep death permanently outside. This ancient fear still survives in modern language. People say they are fighting an illness. They say a disease attacked them. They say pain took over. They say they do not feel like themselves. Even with modern biology, the metaphor of invasion remains because the lived experience remains. The Mesopotamians turned that experience into ritual drama. At the center stood the healer, especially the ritual expert, often known in Akkadian tradition as the Ashipu, who worked through incantation, diagnosis, purification, and divine appeal. Alongside such figures were practical healers who prepared treatments from plants, minerals, oils, and other materials. The boundary between medicine and magic was not the boundary we draw today. Both belonged to the effort to restore order, and order was the true goal, not comfort alone, not symptom relief alone. The patient had to be returned to the proper network of relationships, body with spirit, person with house, house with city, city with God, living with dead, seen with unseen. Illness meant disorder had crossed a line. Healing meant the line had to be redrawn. But what if the line could never be made permanent? What if the human condition itself was an open threshold? A clay house with doors. The gods, the dead, and the unseen world could always find. That may be why Mesopotamian sickness feels so much larger than disease. It is not only about what harms the body, it is about the terror of being penetrable in a universe filled with powers. A person can be strong, respected, wealthy, loved, and ritually protected. Yet some night, without warning, the invisible can arrive. The body can become strange. The face in the polished bronze can look unfamiliar. The voice can weaken. The dreams can darken. The family can gather near the mat and whisper the question no one wants to ask aloud. What has entered? And if the ancient healers spent their lives learning how to force the invader out, why did they also fear that some sicknesses were not invaders at all, but messengers sent with permission from the highest powers? What kind of sound can summon a plague? In the Mesopotamian imagination, human noise was not only an irritation, it could become a cosmic problem. The world was not empty space filled with private human activity. It was a carefully balanced order where gods, cities, animals, rivers, fields, temples, and the dead all occupied their proper places. When one part became excessive, the whole structure trembled. The Atrahasis tradition gives this anxiety one of its darkest forms. Humanity grows until the uproar reaches heaven. The people are not described first as criminals. Their offense is stranger. They are too many, too active, too loud. The sound of life itself becomes unbearable to the divine realm. Enlil, disturbed by the noise, seeks to reduce humanity through disaster. The first great weapon is not the flood. It is disease. This is a chilling detail because plague is not spectacular at first. It does not arrive like an army beneath banners. It does not announce itself with thunder. It begins quietly, with one body becoming warm, one person missing from work, one child refusing food, one house closing its door. In mythic terms, the gods answer collective noise with individual silence. The many voices become fewer, the crowded streets thin. The city learns fear through absence. Imagine standing in a Mesopotamian settlement where the signs begin slowly. At sunrise, fewer workers gather near the canal. At the grinding stones, a woman pauses because her arms shake. At the temple courtyard, a priest notices that one family has not brought its expected offering. In the market, rumors move faster than merchants. Someone says the sickness began near the river. Someone says a god is angry. Someone says the dead have been neglected. Someone says a ritual must be performed immediately. No one sees the divine decree. They only see its effect. The Atrahasis plague episode is not valuable because it gives us a literal medical report. It is valuable because it reveals how ancient Mesopotamian storytellers imagined the relationship between population, divine tolerance, and catastrophe. The story suggests that humanity can awaken destruction without fully understanding what it has done. There is an invisible limit, and the people cross it simply by living too successfully. That is the disturbing genius of the myth. Civilization creates abundance. Abundance creates growth. Growth creates noise. Noise draws divine attention. Divine attention becomes danger. In this pattern, disease is not a random break in the story of humanity. It is a regulator, a force sent to reduce, restrain, and remind. It appears when human expansion threatens the rest of the cosmic order. But why plague? Why not famine first? Why not war? Why not storms? Plague is intimate. It makes each human body participate in the punishment. A storm strikes roofs and fields. A war breaks walls and spills blood in public. A famine empties granaries and weakens the land. But disease hides inside the person. It turns breath into danger. It turns touch into risk. It turns family love into fear. Because the one who cares for the sick may become sick as well. That kind of suffering carries a terrifying lesson. The problem is not outside humanity. It is within human nearness, the very thing that makes civilization possible. People living together becomes the pathway of destruction. The same closeness that allows speech, trade, care, labor, worship, and memory also allows sickness to move. The city becomes powerful because it gathers bodies. It becomes vulnerable for the same reason. Ancient storytellers did not need modern epidemiology to sense this truth. They saw that misfortune could pass through households. They saw that one death could become many. They saw that a sickness could seem to travel. Their sacred language translated that invisible movement into divine action. The god sent it. The demon carried it. The decree allowed it. The body received it. A modern historian would be careful here. The Atrahasis epic does not prove that one specific historical epidemic inspired the story. It does not preserve a clinical description of a known disease. It belongs to mythic literature. Yet myths often preserve emotional realities, and the emotional reality here is unmistakable crowds can become terrifying, abundance can become dangerous, and life can call forth its own limit. What if the ancient disease awakened not when a person sinned, but when humanity became impossible to ignore? This thought reverses many expectations. People often imagine divine punishment as a response to moral failure, but in this story, the unbearable factor is noise. The sound of human existence becomes a sign that the created servants have become a mass presence. They are no longer a quiet solution to divine labor. They are a force in the world. That may reflect a deep urban anxiety. Cities were astonishing achievements, but they also created pressure, more mouths to feed, more disputes to settle, more waste to manage, more rituals to perform, more labor to organize, more dependence on fragile canal systems. A growing population was strength, but also strain. The myth turns that strain into divine insomnia. The gods cannot sleep because the human world has become too much. There is something psychologically brilliant in that image. Sleep belongs to peace. To say the gods cannot sleep is to say the universe itself has lost rest. Human activity has disturbed not only the ground, but heaven. The problem has risen from streets to sky. And then, in the myth, healing comes through a counter-movement. Human survival depends on listening. The same creatures condemned for noise must become silent enough to receive hidden instruction. The wise god, Ea, known in Sumerian tradition as Enki, gives guidance that allows the plague to be turned away. The solution is not rebellion. It is ritual redirection. The people are instructed to focus their offerings and prayers so that the destructive force loses its hold. This is crucial. The story does not imagine humans defeating the gods. It imagines humans surviving by learning the right sacred pattern. Noise brings danger. Proper ritual restores order. The movement is from chaos to form, from crowd sound to sacred speech, from uncontrolled human life to carefully directed prayer. That movement reveals how Mesopotamian religion understood power. Words mattered, but not all words equally. Random human noise disturbed, ritual speech repaired. The same mouth that contributed to the uproar could speak an incantation, a lament, a hymn, or an offering formula that aligned the human world with divine expectation. Speech could wound the cosmic order. Speech could also heal it. The tablet becomes more than a story. It becomes a warning about measure. Humans must live, work, multiply, and worship, but not imagine themselves unlimited. The city must grow, but not forget the gods. The body must labor, but not believe it owns its breath. Noise must become prayer before it becomes offense, and yet the fear remains. How would humans know when they had become too loud? There was no visible line in the dust, no mark on the city wall, no divine messenger standing in the market counting voices. The threshold was hidden. People might cross it during harvest celebrations, during childbirth, during ordinary work, during the very success that seemed to prove divine favor. This is the nightmare inside the Atrahasis plague. Humanity awakens disease without recognizing the moment of awakening. By the time the sickness appears, the decision has already been made somewhere beyond human sight. The body becomes the late announcement of an invisible judgment. Fever is the message after the decree. Weakness is the evidence after the boundary has been crossed. That is why plague in this tradition feels like more than punishment. It feels like revelation. It reveals that human life is always being measured by powers it cannot fully understand. The clay tablet does not simply say that the gods were annoyed. It asks whether creation itself contains a dangerous imbalance. Humans were made to relieve divine labor, but their growth creates divine unrest. The cure to one problem becomes the cause of another. The servant species becomes too numerous to ignore. And if the gods created humans to carry the burden of the earth, but later sent disease when that burden became too loud, what does that say about the fragile agreement between heaven and flesh? Why would a god risk divine anger to save humanity from the disasters of heaven? In Mesopotamian myth, wisdom is not always loud. It does not always arrive as a command from a throne or as thunder above a temple. Sometimes wisdom moves through indirect speech, hidden instruction, dreams, rituals, and carefully chosen loopholes. It slips between decrees. It finds a path where law seems closed. It protects life without openly declaring war against the powers of destruction. This is the strange brilliance of Enki, known in Sumerian tradition as a god of freshwater, intelligence, craft, creation, magic, purification, and deep hidden knowledge. Enki is one of the most fascinating figures in the Mesopotamian world. In later Akkadian tradition, he is often called Ea. He is not merely clever. He is the god who knows how systems work. He understands words, materials, boundaries, divine politics, and the secret ways through which fate can be bent without appearing to break. That makes him dangerous, not evil, not rebellious in a simple sense. Dangerous because he knows the hidden structure of reality. In mythic imagination, many gods possess power, but Enki possesses solutions. When others command, he counsels. When destruction seems unavoidable, he creates an opening. When a crisis threatens humanity, he often stands near the threshold between divine decree and human survival. Picture his domain, not a palace of fire in the sky, but the deep fresh water beneath the earth, the Abzu, a mysterious reservoir imagined as a source of life, wisdom, and generative power. The rivers that nourish the land depend on hidden water. The city depends on canals. The fields depend on irrigation. The body depends on drinking. Purification depends on washing. Life itself emerges from water, and Enki is connected with that hidden life below the visible world. This symbolism matters. Disease dries, burns, weakens, and consumes. Enki's world cools, cleanses, restores, and renews. When plague threatens human beings in the Atrahasis tradition, survival comes not through weapons, but through instruction. Enki reveals how people may direct their worship to the divine force responsible for the affliction, interrupting the disaster. The ancient account is not a medical recipe in the modern sense. It is a sacred strategy. The world has become disordered. Human beings do not know why destruction has entered. Enki provides the pattern by which the destructive power can be addressed. The cure is not merely a substance. The cure is knowing what to do, whom to invoke, and how to redirect the divine situation. In Mesopotamian thought, knowledge can be medicine. This is a profound idea. The person who knows the name of a demon has power. The one who knows the correct incantation has power. The one who knows the offended god can make appeal. The one who knows the ritual timing, the proper offering, the right purification, the correct words, can act inside a world that otherwise feels helpless. Enki embodies that sacred knowledge, but his role also raises an uncomfortable question. If the gods send affliction, why does one god teach humans how to survive it? The answer cannot be reduced to one neat doctrine. Mesopotamian religion does not behave like a system written by one philosopher. It is a living world of city traditions, temple cults, inherited myths, regional gods, scribal schools, old Sumerian names, later Akkadian retellings, and evolving interpretations. Different texts show divine beings in different relationships. They argue, cooperate, compete, deceive, protect, punish, and negotiate. This makes the divine world feel politically alive. Heaven is not simple. Enki's protection of humanity may reflect his role as a culture god, a patron of wisdom, ritual, magic, and human civilization. He is associated with the arts and skills that make ordered life possible. He does not usually destroy civilization. He teaches it how to function. He gives forms, crafts, and sacred powers. So when human beings face disaster, it is fitting that Enki becomes the one who knows the hidden escape. Yet his help is rarely without tension. He must act carefully. A direct challenge to a divine assembly could bring consequences. In flood traditions, his warnings are often indirect. He may speak to a wall, a reed hut, or through a concealed method so that the human listener receives the message without Enki appearing to openly betray the divine decision. This is mythological drama. At its most subtle, the God of wisdom saves by speaking in a way that can be heard by the right person and denied before the wrong audience. What kind of truth must be whispered to survive? That image is central to the mystery of ancient Mesopotamian knowledge. The most important instructions are not always public. Some are guarded by temples, some are preserved by scribes, some belong to ritual specialists, some are spoken at night over a sick body, some are written on tablets that only trained readers can understand. Knowledge is power because ignorance is exposure. A person without knowledge suffers the event. A person with sacred knowledge may alter the outcome. This does not mean ancient people believed every illness could be cured. Their texts contain fear, grief, and resignation as well as hope. Death remained real. Fate remained powerful. Some decrees could not be undone, but the presence of Enki means the world was not closed completely. Between destruction and death stood intelligence, ritual, timing, persuasion, and hidden mercy. That is why Enki's cures feel forbidden. They are not forbidden because healing is evil. They feel forbidden because they reveal that divine decisions are not always final in the way humans imagine. There may be another route, another God, another word, another offering, another door in the wall of fate. For a sick person, that possibility is everything. Imagine hearing that a plague has entered the land by divine decree. The obvious response is despair. But then a ritual specialist arrives and says there is a way to appeal. A name can be invoked. An offering can be redirected. A prayer can be spoken. A substitute can be made. A purification can be performed. The suffering person is not simply waiting for the invisible blow. The human voice can still rise. This is where religion becomes psychologically powerful. It transforms helplessness into action. The patient, the family, the priest, and the healer participate in a drama of rescue. Even if the outcome remains uncertain, the ritual says the universe can be addressed. Enki is the divine source of that possibility. He does not remove human fragility. He does not make clay immortal. He does not abolish disease from the world. Instead, he gives knowledge inside danger. The body remains vulnerable, but not entirely abandoned. The hidden waters of wisdom flow beneath the burning surface of affliction. The disease inside humanity may awaken as weakness, fear, guilt, fever, or the awareness of mortality. But Enki's presence suggests another hidden thing also exists within the human story, the longing to decode suffering. Humans do not only hurt. They ask why. They search for causes. They perform rituals. They test remedies. They preserve instructions. They write tablets. They remember. Perhaps that is the gift Enki represents. Not immortality, but the refusal to suffer without seeking meaning. And yet meaning can be dangerous. A cure given in secret implies that some truths are not meant for everyone. A whispered warning implies that the gods themselves may disagree about how much humanity should know. A hidden remedy implies that survival may depend on knowledge protected from ordinary sight. So the mystery grows darker. If Enki could teach humans how to turn away plague, why did he not remove the source of affliction completely? Perhaps because the ancient world did not imagine wisdom as escape from human limits. Wisdom meant learning how to live inside them. It meant recognizing which powers could be approached, which boundaries could be crossed, and which decrees had to be endured. The healer's bowl, the river water, the incantation, the offering, the whispered divine warning, all of them belong to Enki's world. A world where destruction is real, but not always final. A world where disease may be sent, but healing may also be taught. A world where the human body is fragile, but the human ear may still receive secret knowledge from a God who listens from the deep. But if salvation depends on hidden instruction, who decides which human beings are allowed to hear it? Who stood beside the sick when the invisible world became dangerous? In ancient Mesopotamia, illness did not belong to the body alone. A sick person stood at the center of many possible forces: flesh, spirit, family, house, city, gods, demons, ghosts, oaths, omens, impurity, and fate. Because of this, healing was not the work of one simple profession. It required people who could read signs, prepare remedies, speak sacred words, identify danger, and negotiate with powers no ordinary person could see. The sick room could become a miniature universe. At one side was the body, sweating, trembling, aching, unable to explain itself. At another side was the family, frightened and searching for cause. Near the doorway might stand the healer with oils, plants, bandages, and mixtures. Another specialist might arrive with ritual knowledge, incantations, purifying water, figurines, and the authority of ancient words. The question was never only, what medicine should be given? The question was, what kind of disorder has entered this life? Mesopotamian healing traditions included practical and ritual dimensions. One important figure in Akkadian sources is the ASU, often understood as a practitioner who used treatments such as plant-based remedies, bandages, oils, and other materials. Another major figure is the Ashipu, commonly associated with exorcistic ritual, incantation, diagnosis, purification, and the removal of supernatural danger. These roles could overlap in the broader healing culture, and modern scholars continue to study how they functioned in different periods and contexts. But for the ancient sufferer, the distinction may have mattered less than the result. Someone had to help. Imagine a healer entering a dim house just before dawn. The patient lies still, but the eyes are open. A bowl of water sits nearby. The family has not slept. A child watches from the corner. Outside, the street is quiet, but inside, every small sound feels enormous. The healer looks at the patient's skin, breath, eyes, tongue, hands, and speech. He asks when the illness began. He may ask about dreams. He may ask about offerings. He may ask whether the patient has offended a god, touched impurity, crossed a dangerous place, or been cursed. To modern ears, such questions sound mixed together: medical, religious, psychological, social. To the ancient mind, they belonged together because reality itself was connected. A symptom was a sign, a dream was a sign, A strange animal near the door could be a sign. The day an illness began could be a sign. The body was not only examined, it was interpreted. This interpretive work was essential because Mesopotamian illness often had hidden causes. The patient might not know what had gone wrong. A person could be afflicted by an angry deity without knowing the offense. A ghost could trouble the living because proper rites had been neglected. A curse could be spoken in secret. A demon could strike from an unseen place. Even guilt could be uncertain. Some prayers include the idea of unknown sin, the terrifying possibility that a person has violated divine expectation without understanding how. What kind of fear does that create? A fear deeper than pain. Pain says, something is wrong. Unknown guilt says, perhaps I am wrong. This is where the healer became more than a technician. He was a guide through uncertainty. He gave the family a language for crisis. He offered actions when helplessness threatened to swallow the room. A ritual might not only seek divine aid, it could organize fear, give shape to hope, and restore a sense that the world had not become completely meaningless. The tools of healing were rich with symbolism. Water purified, oil soothed and consecrated. Plants carried properties observed through tradition. Fire transformed. Clay could receive form and meaning. Wool, flour, reeds, stones, and figurines could become ritual instruments. Words activated the process. Gesture, timing, direction, and repetition mattered. A cure was not always one thing. It was a carefully arranged sequence. The healer did not merely treat an object called the body. He re-established boundaries. The harmful power must leave the patient. The impurity must be washed away. The curse must be undone. The god must be appeased. The ghost must be satisfied. The demon must be expelled. The afflicted person must be returned to the proper order of life. Could speech truly heal? For ancient Mesopotamians, sacred speech was not ordinary speech. Incantations had power because they belonged to an inherited world of divine names, mythic precedents, and ritual authority. To speak the right words in the right way was to enter an ancient pattern. The healer's voice did not stand alone. It carried the weight of temples, scribes, gods, and generations of specialists who preserved dangerous knowledge. A modern observer might say that some remedies had practical value, some rituals offered psychological comfort, and some actions reflected symbolic cosmology. That is a useful distinction for modern analysis. But inside the ancient worldview, the entire healing act belonged to one effort to move the sufferer from disorder back into life. And sometimes, that effort must have felt like a battle at the edge of death. The patient's breath weakens. The family waits. The healer recites. Water is poured. A figurine is carried away. A prayer names the divine powers. A substance is placed on the skin. A knot is untied. An evil is commanded to depart. The house becomes silent, except for the voice of ritual. In that moment, everyone present is asking the same question without saying it. Will the invisible world release this body? This is why the priest between worlds became so important. He stood at the threshold where human knowledge ended and sacred knowledge began. He could not guarantee life. No healer could. But he knew how to approach the powers believed to govern life. He knew how to speak when ordinary language failed. The hidden disease inside humanity, seen through this lens, is not only weakness, it is exposure to disorder. Every person can become unbalanced. Every house can become unsafe. Every body can become a doorway through which fear enters. Healing, then, is the attempt to close the doorway again. But the most haunting thing is this. The healer's presence proves that ancient people did not believe suffering was meaningless, even when it was mysterious. They believed something could be done. A ritual could be performed. A plant could be prepared. A prayer could be spoken. A god could be asked. A demon could be named. The sick person was not abandoned to silence, yet the healer also knew the limit of his own power. Some bodies recovered. Some did not. Some rituals seemed to work. Some failed. Some prayers rose into the temple smoke and returned no answer. At the edge of every healing tradition stood the dark fact that no specialist, no king, no temple, and no incantation could save every life. That limit did not destroy the system. It made the system urgent, because every illness became a race against the moment when sickness stopped being a visitor and became a sentence. And if the healer stood between the living and the unseen, what happened when the force approaching the sickbed did not come from a demon, a curse, or an angry god, but from the underworld itself? What if the underworld did not wait for death, but reached upward into the breathing world? In Mesopotamian imagination, the realm of the dead was not a place of bright reward. It was a shadowed country beneath the earth, a land of dust, darkness, silence, and irreversible passage. The dead did not simply vanish. They entered a different order, one separated from the living by ritual, memory, burial, and fear. But that boundary was never completely comfortable, because the powers below could touch the world above. Illness was one of the ways that touch could be imagined. A person becomes weak. The skin changes. The eyes lose brightness. Appetite disappears. Dreams grow heavy. The voice becomes quieter. Family members begin to speak in whispers, as if sound itself might disturb the fragile thread of breath. The sickbed starts to resemble a border crossing. The body remains among the living, but something in the room feels already claimed by another realm. This is where figures of the underworld become terrifying. The great queen Ereshkigal rules below in Mesopotamian myth. Her kingdom is not merely a grave. It is a divine domain with laws, gates, messengers, and powers. Those who descend do not easily return. In some traditions, beings connected to her court carry commands into the living world. Among the most feared is Namtar, associated with fate, destiny, death, and disease carrying power. To ancient thought, sickness could feel like the underworld sending its advance messengers. Not every illness was explained this way. Mesopotamian texts offer many possible causes for suffering. Yet the underworld connection gave disease a special horror. It suggested that the sick person was not only fighting pain, the person was being pulled toward a place from which no ordinary human returns. Imagine a family watching over someone near death. No one speaks openly of the grave at first. They say the fever may break. They say the god may show mercy. They say the healer has not finished the ritual. They bring water. They adjust the bedding. They call another specialist. They promise offerings. They listen for changes in breath. But in their minds, another image gathers. The road downward. Mesopotamian descriptions of the netherworld vary across texts, but the mood is often bleak. The dead dwell in dust. Food and drink offerings from the living matter. Proper burial matters. Memory matters. A neglected dead person can become restless. A ghost without care may trouble the living. Death is not only a biological event. It creates obligations between worlds. This made sickness socially and ritually dangerous. When a person was gravely ill, the household was not only fearing loss, it was preparing, consciously or unconsciously, for a change in relationship. The loved one might become one of the dead. The home might soon have to perform rites. The family would need to bury, remember, feed, and honor. If the rites failed, the boundary between living and dead might become troubled. Could disease be the first stage of becoming ancestral? That possibility changes the sick room. It is no longer only a place of treatment. It is a chamber of transition. The patient lies between identity and memory, between name spoken in conversation and name spoken in ritual. The living still touch the body, but the underworld may already be waiting. This is why ancient healing and funerary concern cannot be entirely separated. The goal of healing was to keep the person among the living. But if death came, another set of duties began. The dead had to be placed correctly. Offerings had to be made. The ghost had to be at rest. The house had to continue without allowing grief to become spiritual danger. The underworld, then, was not far away. It was under the floor, beneath the city, beyond the grave, behind the dream, beside the sickbed. It pressed against life through omens, ghosts, mourning rites, and the visible decay of the body. Modern people often think of death as an ending point. Ancient Mesopotamians often treated it as a change of address within a larger cosmic geography. The dead went somewhere. They had conditions. They could be remembered or neglected. They could be quiet or restless. The living had responsibilities toward them. But the road downward remained frightening because it was one direction for ordinary humans. That one direction is the hidden wound inside mortality. A person can travel to another city and return. A merchant can cross deserts and come home. A king can campaign in distant lands and re-enter his palace. A priest can enter the temple and emerge. But the underworld is different. Its gates symbolize an irreversible law. In the famous Sumerian tradition of Inanna's descent, even a great goddess who enters the underworld must pass through gates and lose powers as she descends. The story is complex, sacred, and not a simple map of human death. Yet its imagery is unforgettable. Descent strips away status. Power does not travel downward untouched. Even the divine must confront the laws of the realm below. What, then, of humans? If a goddess is reduced at the gates, what hope does a clay body have? This question hangs over Mesopotamian sickness. The weakening body seems to rehearse descent. Strength falls away. Appetite falls away. Speech falls away. Social identity falls away. The person who once worked, traded, judged, sang, gave orders, held children, or served in the temple becomes still. Like Inanna passing through gates, the sick person loses layers of worldly power. Jewelry may be removed, clothing changed, food refused, voice diminished, breath thinned. The underworld does not need to appear visibly. The body becomes the image of descent. Yet Mesopotamian religion did not treat the dead as meaningless. Offerings mattered because relationship continued. Names mattered because memory gave the dead a place. Burial mattered because the transition had to be ordered. The tragedy was not only death itself, but improper death abandonment, neglect, restlessness, a ghost wandering without care. So the living feared two things at once. They feared losing the person. They feared failing the person after loss. This reveals another layer of the disease inside humanity. It is not only that every body can become sick. It is that every human belongs to a chain of care that death can disturb. To be human is to need others in life, and to need others even in death. The body's weakness becomes a test of the household, the family, the ritual system, and the memory of the community. No one dies alone in a symbolic sense. Even lonely death sends obligations into the world. Perhaps that is why underworld messengers were so feared. They did not only end breath, they changed the entire arrangement around a person. A son becomes a mourner. A wife becomes a widow. A house becomes a place of rites. A name becomes something spoken to the dead. The living table must make room for offerings to one who no longer eats like the living. Disease begins as a private suffering, but it can awaken an entire underworld network. This is the terror behind Namtar and the powers below. They remind humans that the boundary between life and death is not held by desire. Love cannot seal it. Wealth cannot seal it. Kingship cannot seal it. Youth cannot seal it. Only divine permission seems to delay the crossing, and permission is never permanent. The clay body stands upright for a while. Then the earth calls back what belongs to it. Still, the ancient texts leave room for ritual resistance. The sick can be prayed for. The dead can be honored. The ghost can be appeased. The underworld can be acknowledged without being allowed to dissolve the order of the living. Mesopotamian culture built practices around this knowledge, as if to say the lower world exists, but it must remain in its place. And that may be the most important line of all. Life depends on boundaries, between pure and impure, between temple and street, between human and divine, between living and dead. Sickness frightens because it blurs the boundary. The patient is here, but not fully secure. The underworld is there, but suddenly near. What if illness is the moment when the distance between worlds becomes thin? A fevered dream may bring the dead into the room. A wasting body may make relatives whisper of burial. A sudden pain may feel like a messenger touching the flesh. The sick person becomes a threshold no one wants to cross, yet everyone must approach. In that fragile space, ancient Mesopotamians did not see only biology. They saw geography. The body was a map, and disease marked the road downward. But if the underworld had messengers, gates, laws, and a queen, then who decided when the road opened beneath a human life? What if sickness could sleep inside a life for years before anyone knew it was there? Ancient Mesopotamian texts often describe suffering as something that arrives suddenly. But the fear behind them is more complicated. Disease could appear in a moment, yet its cause might belong to something older, a forgotten vow, an unclean contact, a neglected offering, a curse spoken in secret, an angered deity, a restless ghost, or a ritual mistake no one remembered making. This is the terror of the sleeping curse. It does not reveal itself when the boundary is first crossed. It waits. A person continues eating, working, marrying, trading, praying, laughing, and sleeping. The house appears normal. The family appears safe. The body obeys. Then one day, without warning, the hidden disorder awakens. A fever rises. A dream darkens. A child weakens. A man cannot stand. A woman hears the name of the dead in sleep. To the ancient mind, the question was not only, what happened today? It was also, what happened long ago that has now returned? This way of thinking made illness part of time. A disease did not always begin with the first symptom. It could begin with an offense, impurity, or disturbance that had been invisible until the body finally became the place where it appeared. The body became the delayed tablet on which an earlier mistake was written. Imagine a merchant returning from a journey across the dry steppe. He has passed abandoned places, crossed unfamiliar shrines, slept near ruins, eaten in foreign houses, bargained with strangers, and walked beside graves whose names he did not know. He comes home alive. He brings goods. His family welcomes him. Nothing seems wrong. Weeks later, he begins to dream of a figure standing outside the door. Then comes weakness. Then comes fear. The family asks what he brought back besides wool, copper, grain, or stone. Did he step where he should not have stepped? Did he fail to pour water for the dead? Did he unknowingly offend a local god? Did a curse follow him home? Did impurity cling to his clothing? Did something unseen cross the threshold with him? This fear was not irrational inside its own worldview. Mesopotamian life was filled with boundaries, and boundaries required care. There were sacred places, dangerous places, pure actions, impure contacts, proper days, unlucky signs, divine obligations, household duties, and rituals for the dead. The world had order, but order had to be maintained. A careless act could disturb forces beyond ordinary sight. Could a person be guilty without knowing it? Many ancient prayers suggest that this fear was real. People asked forgiveness not only for known offenses, but also for unknown sins. That phrase contains a deep psychological darkness. It means the sufferer may not even understand the accusation. The person feels punished, but cannot read the charge. This transforms disease into interrogation. The sick person looks backward through memory. What did I say? Whom did I offend? What god did I neglect? What sign did I ignore? What promise did I break? What dead relative did I fail to honor? What impurity did I carry into my home? The illness becomes a question with no visible origin. This is why ritual specialists were needed. They did not only treat symptoms, they helped search for hidden causes. Through diagnostic traditions, omens, prayers, confessions, incantations, and ritual procedures, they tried to locate the unseen disturbance. The sick body was evidence, but incomplete evidence. It had to be read in relation to dreams, timing, household events, divine names, ritual history, and the patient's own life. A modern doctor may ask when the symptoms began. An ancient healer might ask when the disorder began. Those are not always the same question. The concept of impurity helps explain this. Impurity was not dirt in the simple physical sense, although washing could be involved. It was a dangerous condition, a state that could attach, spread, or separate a person from proper order. It could require purification because it placed the human being out of alignment with the sacred structure of life. Water mattered because water could restore boundaries. Fire mattered because fire could transform. Words mattered because words could identify and command. Offerings mattered because offerings could repair relationships. The sleeping curse is frightening because it suggests that disorder may be present even when life feels ordinary. A house can seem peaceful while something is gathering. A body can seem healthy while fate is turning. A family can believe itself safe while a forgotten obligation waits like a shadow behind the wall. This is not the same as saying the Mesopotamians believed every illness came from wrongdoing. Their healing culture was varied and complex. They used remedies, observations, and practical treatments. But many texts show that suffering could be interpreted through moral, ritual, and supernatural uncertainty. Disease was never only located in tissue. It could be located in relationship. Relationship with gods, relationship with the dead, relationship with family, relationship with oath, relationship with purity, relationship with the unseen order. When one relationship broke, the body might eventually bear the damage. What if the disease inside every human is the inability to know all the forces that shape one's life? This is a different kind of sickness. Not fever, not plague, not visible wound, but uncertainty. The human being lives inside a network too vast to understand. The gods see more than humans see. The dead remember what the living forget. Words spoken in anger may outlive the moment. Ritual debts may remain unpaid. A city may carry impurity from violence, neglect, or disaster. A person may inherit consequences without recognizing their source. In this world, the body becomes the place where hidden history awakens. A curse is powerful because it collapses time. Something spoken once can strike later. A neglected right can return as present danger. A forgotten dead person can trouble the living after years of silence. The past does not stay past. It waits for the proper opening. That idea would have shaped how people listened to illness. A sudden pain was not only pain, it was a message from somewhere in time. A nightmare was not only a dream, it was a possible contact. A repeated misfortune was not coincidence until proven harmless. Patterns demanded interpretation. The house itself could carry memory. A threshold where blood had spilled. A room where someone died improperly. A storage place touched by impurity. A bed where nightmares repeated. A vessel used in the wrong way. A doorway crossed by hostile forces. To restore health, the healer might need to treat the space as well as the person. The household could be purified. Objects could be removed. Protective signs could be placed. Incantations could be spoken at entrances. Water could be sprinkled. Evil could be transferred and carried away. The sleeping curse reveals the Mesopotamian fear that humans do not control the timing of consequence. Something can awaken when it chooses, or when the gods permit, or when a ritual boundary fails. The sufferer experiences the awakening as sudden, but the unseen world may have been preparing it for a long time. This gives illness a terrible patience. A demon may lurk. A ghost may wait. A god may delay anger. A curse may travel slowly. Fate may ripen in silence. And when the moment arrives, the body is the first to know. Perhaps this is why ancient prayers often sound so urgent and humble. The speaker does not always argue innocence. The speaker pleads from uncertainty. I do not know. What I have done becomes one of the most human sentences imaginable. It is the cry of a fragile creature surrounded by laws it cannot fully read. That cry still feels recognizable, even in a modern world. People search the past when suffering begins. They ask what caused it. They review choices, exposures, family histories, stress, environment, inheritance, chance. They ask whether the warning signs were there. They wonder what slept unseen inside the body before it awakened. The ancient Mesopotamian answer used gods, ghosts, curses, demons, and impurity. The modern answer uses cells, pathogens, genes, trauma, and time. The language has changed, but the fear remains. Something can be present before we know it. And when it awakens, life divides into two parts: the time before the sign, the time after the sign. For the ancient sufferer, healing meant more than stopping pain. It meant finding the hidden origin and persuading the world to release its claim. The curse had to be named. The impurity had to be washed. The ghost had to be appeased. The god had to be softened. The past had to be brought into ritual speech so it could stop speaking through the body. But what if the deepest curse was older than any individual mistake? What if every human being carries a condition that sleeps from birth, waiting not for guilt, but for time itself to awaken it? What if the body remembers the earth it came from? In the oldest Mesopotamian imagination, humanity is often connected with clay, not polished stone, not shining metal, not starfire. Clay, wet earth shaped by hand, pressed, marked, dried, broken, repaired, reused, buried, and sometimes hardened by flame into something that can endure long after the hand is gone. Clay is humble. Clay is useful. Clay is fragile until transformed. This material symbolism reaches deep into the Mesopotamian view of human life. The same substance that formed bricks, tablets, figurines, vessels, and seals could also become an image of human origin. The body was not imagined as an isolated miracle floating above nature. It belonged to the ground. It was made from the same world it walked upon, and the ground always takes back what belongs to it. In Sumerian and later Mesopotamian traditions, creation is not presented in one single uniform account. Different texts preserve different images: divine planning, mother goddesses, clay formation, divine blood in later Akkadian tradition, and the wisdom of gods who organize life. The details change across compositions and periods. But the clay motif remains one of the most powerful ways ancient people expressed human nature. A clay body is a mystery. It can move, speak, love, build, pray, remember, and write. But it can also crack. This is where modern interpretation must move carefully. Ancient texts do not state, in a direct biological way, that mortality is a disease inserted into humanity. That would be too simple. Yet they do repeatedly place human beings within a condition of limitation. Humans are formed, assigned labor, exposed to divine decision, threatened by disease, and destined for death. The pattern suggests that fragility is not accidental to being human. It is built into the very image of humanity. The clay body remembers its material. Imagine a potter beside a canal. His hands press into wet earth. He adds water. He turns the mass. He shapes a vessel, smoothing the walls, adjusting the rim, correcting imbalance with pressure from the fingers. The object begins to hold form, but only because it is constantly supported. Too much water and it collapses. Too little and it cracks. A careless touch distorts it. Heat can harden it, but also break it. Now imagine ancient people applying that image to themselves. The human being stands upright, but not by absolute power. Breath, food, water, sleep, family, society, and divine favor hold the form together. Remove one support, and the vessel trembles. Remove several, and it breaks. What if disease is the moment clay remembers it is clay? That thought is not a literal translation from a tablet. It is a modern interpretive lens, drawn from the ancient imagery of clay, mortality, and divine dependence. But it helps explain why Mesopotamian stories can feel so emotionally true. The fear is not simply that illness attacks from outside. The fear is that illness reveals what the body has always been: temporary, dependent, borrowed. In daily life, the body can seem permanent because it obeys repetition. Morning comes, and the hands work. The mouth eats. The legs walk. The eyes recognize familiar streets. The mind carries names, debts, songs, faces, and tasks. Continuity creates the illusion of ownership. A person says, "my body," as if the body is a possession. Then sickness interrupts the illusion. Suddenly, the hand is not fully obedient. The stomach rejects food. The head burns. The chest tightens. The legs fail. The voice weakens. The body that felt like self becomes strange, almost like another being with its own laws. Ancient Mesopotamians explained this strangeness through gods, demons, ghosts, impurity, omens, fate, and ritual language. Modern medicine explains much of it through physical processes, but the human experience remains hauntingly similar. Illness makes a person realize the body is not fully under command. That realization may be the awakening of the hidden condition. A person can ignore mortality for years. Youth hides it. Strength hides it. Routine hides it. Desire hides it. Work hides it. The city hides it with noise, markets, music, politics, and ambition. But the first serious illness tears the covering away. For a moment, the human being sees the truth the clay knew all along. The form will not hold forever. This is why mortality can feel like a disease, even though it is not a disease in the ordinary sense. It has no single symptom at first. It begins at birth. It progresses quietly through time. It touches every organ, every memory, every relationship. It cannot be cured by wealth, rank, beauty, intelligence, or royal command. It may sleep under years of health, but it is always moving. The ancient world gave this condition sacred language. Fate, decree, the underworld, the lot of humanity, the boundary between gods and mortals. These words did not remove the fear, but they placed it inside a meaningful order. A human dies not because life is meaningless, but because human life belongs to a category different from divine life. The gods endure in ways humans do not. The dead pass into their realm. The living must perform rites, speak names, maintain offerings, and accept that no one remains above ground forever. Yet the clay image contains a strange consolation. Clay does not only break, it also records. A tablet made of clay can preserve a prayer after the worshipper dies. A brick can carry a royal inscription after the king becomes dust. A figurine can hold ritual meaning during a healing ceremony. A vessel can carry water to the thirsty. Clay is fragile, but it is also the medium through which memory survives. Human beings share that paradox. The body fails, but the signs remain. A person's voice disappears, but a hymn can be copied. A city collapses, but its tablets may sleep under ruins for thousands of years. A scribe dies nameless, yet the wedge marks of his hand can still be read in another age beneath electric light. Perhaps the clay body does not defeat death by refusing to break. Perhaps it resists death by leaving impressions. This is one reason Mesopotamian civilization feels so powerful. Its people knew fragility intimately, yet they created durable memory from fragile material. They wrote on clay because clay was everywhere, but clay became their path to a kind of survival. The same substance that symbolized human weakness became the archive of human thought. There is a deep irony here. The human body returns to dust. The clay tablet remains. The scribe, made of perishable flesh, preserves words in a material that can outlast empires. The thing without breath becomes the vessel of memory. The breathing creature becomes silence. What does that say about the disease inside humanity? It may suggest that the hidden affliction is not only mortality, but the knowledge of mortality. Animals die, plants die, cities die, stars fade in myths and observations. But humans write about dying. Humans ask why they must die. Humans build rituals around death. Humans create stories where gods explain, delay, punish, or negotiate death. Humans turn the awareness of ending into culture. Consciousness makes mortality sharper. The body weakens, but the mind anticipates the weakening. The person suffers not only the pain that has arrived, but the imagined pain ahead. A child does not know the entire road. An adult begins to see it. An elder feels the road beneath every step. In that sense, the clay body carries two awakenings. The first is physical illness, aging, pain, decline. The second is inward, The recognition that these are not accidents, but signs of a universal human limit. Ancient Mesopotamian texts do not speak in modern philosophical categories, but they circle this truth through myth and ritual. Humans are formed, given work, subjected to fate, healed through sacred arts, threatened by divine forces, and eventually drawn toward the underworld. The clay body moves through a world of gods, but never becomes a god. And perhaps that was the ancient warning hidden in the material itself. Do not mistake animation for immortality. Do not mistake strength for permanence. Do not mistake civilization for escape. The body may stand like a temple wall for a time, but clay remembers water, pressure, sun, and collapse. Every heartbeat is part of a structure that must one day loosen. Every breath is borrowed from a world that will reclaim it. The disease awakens when this knowledge becomes personal, not when people know, in general, that humans die. Everyone knows that from a distance. It awakens when the truth steps close enough to touch the skin. When the body falters, when the grave is no longer an idea, when clay recognizes clay, and if mortality is the condition hidden in every human form, then why did the ancient scribes spend so much effort pressing memory into the very substance that reminded them they would not last? What happens when the gods do not strike the body first, but silence the world around it? In Mesopotamian stories of divine punishment, disease does not stand alone. It belongs to a larger family of disasters: drought, famine, infertility, failed harvests, dying animals, empty storehouses, and finally, flood. These forces are different on the surface, but they share one terrifying purpose in mythic imagination. They reduce life. A plague weakens the body. A drought weakens the field. A famine weakens the household. Infertility weakens the future. Together, they form a language of divine withdrawal. To ancient people living between powerful rivers and dangerous skies, survival depended on cycles that no human hand could fully control. Rain in the north, river flow in the south, canal maintenance, soil fertility, seed quality, animal health, labor, political stability, and temple favor all had to align. One failure could become many. A field without water meant no grain. No grain meant hunger. Hunger meant weakened bodies. Weakened bodies became more vulnerable to illness. Illness reduced labor. Reduced labor damaged canals. Damaged canals threatened the next harvest. Disaster was rarely alone. It formed chains. That is why Mesopotamian texts often place human suffering inside a cosmic pattern. The body and the land mirror one another. When divine favor flows, canals fill, grain rises, animals reproduce, women give birth, kings prosper, temples receive offerings, and cities celebrate. When divine favor is removed, the world dries, wombs close, animals fail, disease spreads, and human voices become laments. What if the hidden disease inside humanity awakens not only in flesh, but in the systems that keep flesh alive? Picture a city at the edge of scarcity. The canal water has dropped. Mud cracks under the sun. Farmers walk along fields that should be green. A temple official counts grain with a face that reveals nothing. Families begin grinding less flour. Animals grow thin. Children are told to wait. The marketplace changes tone. Arguments become sharper. Rumors travel from gate to gate. Someone says the gods are displeased. Someone says the king failed in ritual duty. Someone says an omen warned this would happen. Then sickness appears, not as an isolated curse, but as the natural companion of hunger, fear, and exhaustion. The ancient mind did not separate these experiences into neat categories. Famine, plague, and divine anger belong to the same atmosphere of collapse. When the world around the body failed, the body itself followed. This connection appears powerfully in Mesopotamian flood and destruction traditions. In the Atrahasis tradition, divine attempts to reduce humanity do not rely on one method only. Plague, drought, and famine become successive pressures. Each disaster tightens the boundary around life. Each one asks the same brutal question: how long can humans continue when the sources of survival are taken away? Drought is especially haunting because it is a disaster of absence. A storm terrifies with excess. A flood comes with too much water. War comes with noise, metal, fire, and movement. But drought is emptiness. It is the missing river, the cloud that does not break, the field that does not answer the farmer's labor. It makes humans wait while life slowly withdraws. In a world where gods controlled fertility and abundance, drought could feel like a door closing in heaven. Famine turns that closed door into pain. The stomach becomes the place where cosmic disorder is felt. Hunger is not only bodily need, it is social humiliation, political danger, ritual failure, and spiritual terror. A hungry city cannot honor the gods properly. Offerings shrink, festivals falter, workers weaken, families sell possessions, debt spreads, trust breaks. The divine economy itself is threatened because the humans created to feed the gods can barely feed themselves. That is one of the deepest ironies in Mesopotamian thought. Humans exist to sustain divine order through labor and offering. But divine punishment can remove the very abundance that makes offering possible. How can a starving people feed the gods? This question does not destroy the religious system. It intensifies it. In crisis, ritual becomes urgent. Prayers rise. Laments are sung. The city seeks restoration. The king may present himself as mediator, responsible for justice, temple service, and divine favor. Priests may perform rites to cool anger, purify pollution, or restore balance. The suffering of the land becomes a sacred emergency. A barren field is not only an agricultural problem, it is a theological wound. Mesopotamian literature contains city laments where destroyed cities are described with heartbreaking imagery. Abandoned streets, silent temples, scattered people, ruined walls, and gods who have departed. These laments are not simple history reports. Although they may echo real destructions and political catastrophes, they are poetic religious responses to collapse. They imagine disaster as the withdrawal of protective divine presence. That idea is crucial. For a Mesopotamian city, the worst fate was not merely to be damaged, it was to be abandoned by its god. When the god leaves, order leaves. When order leaves, every human body becomes exposed. In this sense, disease awakens in the space left by absence. The god's protection withdraws. The canal dries. Grain fails. Hunger spreads. Bodies weaken. Ghosts multiply. Rituals become desperate. The city that once rang with work songs becomes a place of dust and lamentation. Could silence be a symptom? The silence of fields without workers. The silence of temples without festivals. The silence of streets after death. The silence of a house where no child is born. This silence is different from peace. It is the sound of life being reduced. Ancient Mesopotamian texts often understand fertility as more than reproduction. Fertility is the world's permission to continue. Seed, womb, herd, river, field, and city all participate in continuity. When fertility fails, the future itself becomes sick. That brings infertility into the mystery. A disease can strike the living body. Infertility strikes the line beyond the body. It threatens descendants, inheritance, ancestral memory, household labor, and rights for the dead. In a culture where family continuity mattered deeply, the inability to produce children could be devastating not only emotionally, but ritually and socially. Without descendants, who remembers? Who gives offerings? Who speaks the name? Who keeps the house from becoming a place of ghosts? Thus, the failure of birth becomes connected to the fear of death. If plague fills graves and infertility empties cradles, the human line narrows from both directions. The present dies, and the future does not arrive. This is why divine population control in Mesopotamian myth feels so severe. It does not only kill individuals, it rearranges time. Plague removes those who live now. Famine weakens those who remain. Drought attacks the next harvest. Infertility attacks the next generation. Disaster becomes a net thrown across past, present, and future. And still, the myths preserve resistance. Human beings pray. Enki gives counsel. Rituals are performed. The destructive force is addressed. The gods can be petitioned. The land can be restored. Water can return. Grain can rise. Wombs can open. Festivals can resume. The city can breathe again. But restoration never erases the warning. The ancient world knew that abundance was conditional. Every full granary was temporary. Every flowing canal required maintenance and blessing. Every child born entered a fragile web. Every healthy body depended on land, water, society, and divine tolerance. The hidden disease in every human being may be dependency, but on a scale larger than the body. No person survives by flesh alone. The body needs bread. Bread needs grain. Grain needs water. Water needs river and sky. River and sky belong, in ancient thought, to powers greater than human will. So when drought comes, the body learns that it was never separate from the field. When famine comes, the body learns that hunger can become a city-wide prayer. When infertility comes, the body learns that mortality is not only personal, but generational. When plague comes, the body learns that breath itself is shared with others. This is the terrifying unity of Mesopotamian suffering. The same divine order that forms the human body also sustains the world around it. If that order trembles, the human being trembles with it. A person may think sickness begins under the skin. The ancient texts suggest it may begin in heaven, in the field, in the canal, in the temple, in the womb, in the broken relationship between humans and the powers that allow life to continue. And if disease, famine, drought, and barrenness were all signs of life being measured and reduced, what would happen when the sickness moved from the common people into the body of the king himself? What if the king's sickness was never only his own? In ancient Mesopotamia, kingship was not merely political power. A king was expected to stand at a dangerous meeting point between the gods and the land. He built temples, restored offerings, defeated enemies, judged disputes, protected cities, maintained canals, and presented himself as the one chosen or favored by divine authority. His body wore royal clothing, but symbolically it carried more than one life. It carried the condition of the kingdom. This does not mean every ancient Mesopotamian text claimed that a sick king automatically caused a sick land. The evidence is more complex. Royal inscriptions, rituals, omens, hymns, and historical traditions show different ways of imagining the relationship between ruler, god, city, and cosmos. But one pattern is unmistakable: the king's health, purity, ritual correctness, and divine favor mattered because the king represented order. If the king became polluted, cursed, endangered, or rejected by the gods, the entire land could feel exposed. Imagine the palace at night. The outer courtyards are guarded. Torches burn along mud brick walls. Messengers wait in silence. In an inner chamber, the ruler lies awake, unable to sleep. His physicians and ritual experts have been summoned. Priests whisper over bowls of water. A dream has troubled him. An omen has been reported. Perhaps an eclipse has darkened the sky. Perhaps the king has felt weakness in his limbs. Perhaps a strange pain has appeared that no one dares describe carelessly. The body of the king has become a question, and when a king's body becomes a question, the whole city listens. Ordinary people could fall sick in private houses, but royal illness carried public danger. If the ruler was chosen by the gods, what did his suffering mean? Was it a warning? Was a deity angry? Had ritual purity failed? Was an enemy's curse at work? Did the sickness reveal hidden guilt? Was the dynasty threatened? Would the canals be neglected? Would enemies attack? Would the gods withdraw protection from the city? In this world, health was political. The king did not stand outside divine law. He was surrounded by it. Court scholars studied omens, celestial events, dreams, births, animal behavior, and unusual signs because these could reveal divine intentions. The heavens, the body, and the kingdom formed a network of meaning. A sign in the sky could concern the throne. A deformity in an animal birth could be interpreted as a message. A royal dream could become a matter of state. Could the gods speak through the king's flesh? The possibility was terrifying. One of the most striking Mesopotamian practices connected to royal danger is the substitute king ritual known from later Mesopotamian history. When certain omens, especially threatening celestial signs, indicated danger to the true king, a substitute could be placed temporarily on the throne. The danger symbolically fell upon the substitute rather than the actual ruler. The practice reflects an extraordinary idea: fate might be redirected if the correct ritual structure was created. This does not mean the ritual was simple theater. It belonged to a worldview where symbols, roles, names, clothing, and ritual status had real force. To wear kingship, even temporarily, could make someone the target of a decree. The danger aimed at the king might strike the person occupying the kingly role. That idea reveals the power and terror of ancient representation. A human body could stand in for another body. A substitute could receive danger. A ritual could move fate from one vessel to another. The king's body was so important that another body might be used to protect it. This logic also appears in healing and purification traditions more broadly. Evil could be transferred. Impurity could be carried away. A figurine could represent a harmful force. A goat, object, or substitute could bear symbolic danger. The ancient world treated identity as something ritual could shape. Under the right conditions, one thing could carry the burden meant for another. But the substitute king ritual exposes a darker question. If fate can be redirected, who is allowed to be saved? A king's life mattered because the stability of the land seemed to depend on it. Yet the ritual also shows the inequality of survival. Royal bodies received extraordinary protection because they were not merely personal bodies. They were symbols of the state. The poor suffered in silence, but the king's fever could mobilize scholars, priests, physicians, and the machinery of sacred power. This is not only a historical observation, it is a human pattern. Societies often treat certain bodies as carrying more public meaning than others. The king's sickness becomes the kingdom's omen. The commoner's sickness becomes a household grief. Mesopotamian royal inscriptions often portray kings as builders and restorers. They dig canals, repair temples, establish justice, defeat chaos, and return divine favor to the land. Such texts are not neutral news reports. They are royal self-presentation, shaped to show legitimacy. But their repeated themes tell us what kings needed people to believe that proper kingship healed disorder. The good king makes the land flourish. The bad or abandoned king leaves it vulnerable. When famine, invasion, plague, or destruction struck, people could interpret disaster through the failure of divine order. The king might be blamed, mourned, replaced, or ritually protected depending on the situation. In a world where gods governed cities, political collapse could become theological collapse. A broken king meant more than a weak ruler. It suggested a crack in the sacred structure. This is why royal rituals focused so intensely on purity, offerings, omens, and divine approval. A king could not simply command armies. He had to stand correctly before the gods. He had to enter temples properly. He had to maintain cults. He had to appear as the chosen shepherd of the people. His body, clothing, crown, throne, and name were loaded with symbolic force. The crown did not erase mortality. It made mortality more dangerous. A sick farmer might threaten one household's survival. A sick king might threaten succession, army morale, temple confidence, diplomatic stability, and the interpretation of divine favor. The king's body became the place where private weakness and public destiny met. And here, the hidden disease inside humanity becomes visible in a new form. Power cannot cure clay. The ruler may sit above thousands. He may command laborers, priests, scribes, soldiers, judges, and governors. He may build walls so massive they seem permanent. He may carve his name into stone and dedicate temples to gods. He may be praised as mighty, beloved, chosen, radiant, and victorious. Yet he can still tremble in bed. He can still fear a dream. He can still listen for footsteps in the hallway and wonder whether the gods have turned away. Kingship magnifies the oldest human vulnerability. The higher the throne, the farther the fall. The more divine the royal image, the more frightening the mortal body beneath it. A crown can make a man appear closer to the gods, but sickness reminds everyone that he remains human. Perhaps this is why royal bodies required so much ritual protection. They were symbols trying to resist the truth of flesh. They stood between heaven and the land, but they were made of the same unstable material as everyone else. Their health could be guarded, interpreted, substituted, purified, prayed over, and surrounded by experts, but never guaranteed. The king's body was a temple of authority built over a grave. That image would have haunted every palace chamber, behind the carved doors, beneath the embroidered robes, under the crown and oil and sacred titles. There was still a body that could fail. If that body failed at the wrong moment, the land might feel the tremor. And if disease could turn even the king into a warning sign, then what did ancient people see when the same fear appeared in the myths and sacred stories of other civilizations? Why do so many ancient civilizations tell stories where human suffering begins near the gods? Across the ancient Near East and the wider Mediterranean world, cultures did not describe the human condition in exactly the same way. Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, Israel, Greece, and Persia. Each had their own languages, gods, rituals, political worlds, and sacred imaginations. Their traditions should not be flattened into one story. Yet when placed beside one another carefully, certain questions keep returning like footprints in dust. Why do humans die? Why do divine beings remain above us? Why does knowledge bring danger? Why does life require sacrifice? Why does suffering seem attached to the very structure of existence? These are not small similarities. They are the deepest questions human beings ask when they begin to compare themselves with the powers they worship. In Mesopotamia, humans are often created to relieve divine labor and maintain offerings. Their life is purposeful, but limited. They serve the gods, yet remain mortal. Disease, famine, flood, and fate can be sent or allowed by divine powers. The human place is real, but never secure. In Egypt, the mood is different. Egyptian religion developed a far more elaborate hope for the afterlife, especially through preservation, judgment, ritual knowledge, and union with divine order. The dead might pass through trials, be judged, and continue in a transformed existence if properly prepared and justified. But even there, death was not ignored. The entire sacred culture of tombs, mummification, spells, offerings, and judgment shows that mortality was a central problem requiring cosmic treatment. Different world, same wound. The body ends. The soul, name, breath, shadow, or identity must somehow be protected against disappearance. In ancient Israelite traditions, especially in the Hebrew Bible, suffering is often linked with covenant, obedience, justice, exile, divine testing, wisdom, and the limits of human understanding. The story of Eden is not Sumerian and should not be treated as a copied version of Mesopotamian myth. But it asks a related question: why do humans live outside an ideal state, knowing labor, pain, mortality, and distance from divine presence? The details are distinct, yet the anxiety is familiar. Human life is not what it might have been. In Greek myth, another pattern appears. Prometheus gives humans fire, a divine gift associated with craft, culture, and survival. But the gift brings punishment and tension between gods and mortals. Pandora enters the story with a jar or container from which miseries spread among humankind, while hope remains in ambiguous relation to suffering. The Greek imagination differs sharply from Mesopotamian theology, yet it also connects human civilization, divine boundary crossing, and the arrival of affliction. Why would knowledge and culture so often come with a cost? This question matters because Mesopotamian myths do not stand in isolation. The ancient world was full of cultural contact. Trade routes moved goods, but also stories. Empires conquered cities and absorbed gods. Scribes copied older compositions. Languages overlapped. Motifs changed as they traveled. Flood stories, creation themes, divine councils, sacred kingship, underworld journeys, and cosmic battles appear in different forms across regions. But similarity does not always mean direct borrowing. Sometimes cultures influence one another directly. Sometimes they inherit older shared patterns. Sometimes they independently develop similar answers because human beings everywhere face death, hunger, disease, birth, weather, aging, and fear. A responsible interpretation must keep these possibilities separate. The more interesting point is not that every civilization said the same thing. They did not. The more interesting point is that each civilization placed human suffering inside a larger story. No major ancient culture treated mortality as a small inconvenience. Death had to be ritualized. Disease had to be explained. Disaster had to be interpreted. The gap between gods and humans had to be named. In Mesopotamia, The gap often appears through labor and fate. In Egypt, through preservation and judgment. In Hebrew traditions, through covenant, wisdom, exile, and obedience. In Greece, through divine jealousy, tragic knowledge, and the limits placed on mortals. In Persia, especially in later Zoroastrian thought, suffering is connected with a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, order and destructive evil. Here again, the body and world are not neutral. Human life belongs to a moral and cosmic conflict. Different symbols, same pressure. Human beings looked at their own fragility and concluded that it must mean something. Picture an ancient caravan road beneath a hard blue sky. Merchants carry lapis, textiles, metals, spices, grain, and stories. A myth heard in one city becomes a memory in another. A divine name changes language. A flood becomes a moral warning. A hero becomes a king. A demon becomes a spirit. A ritual phrase is translated, altered, forgotten, reborn. Across generations, the mystery travels. What is humanity? Not merely, what are humans made of? But what kind of creature knows the gods and still dies? That question may be the true bridge between traditions. Humans are close enough to the divine to receive laws, dreams, omens, fire, writing, wisdom, ritual, kingship, and sacred names, but they are not close enough to escape decay. The gods may speak to humans, use humans, bless humans, punish humans, test humans, or love humans, depending on the tradition. Yet humans remain the beings who bury their dead. This makes religion a response to a contradiction. Humans imagine eternity, but live briefly. Humans build temples, but cannot stop their own aging. Humans speak to heaven, but return to earth. The disease inside every human, seen through comparative tradition, may be this contradiction itself. The mind reaches upward, the body pulls downward. Civilization rises from the soil, then collapses back into it. Sacred stories try to explain why a creature capable of divine thought must endure animal suffering. Modern interpretation can see psychology here. Myths organize fear. They give shape to grief. They transform random suffering into narrative. They place private pain inside cosmic order so that a person does not suffer in a meaningless void. But this does not reduce the myths to mere comfort. They also preserve ancient honesty. They admit that human life is unstable, that knowledge can hurt, that power has limits, and that death is the common inheritance beneath every crown. The comparison also reveals one more unsettling pattern. In many traditions, the human problem awakens at the border between ignorance and awareness. When humans know too much, receive fire, hear divine law, learn ritual secrets, discover mortality, or become conscious of their place, suffering becomes sharper. The body may have been mortal all along, but knowledge makes mortality visible. A creature that does not understand death simply dies. A creature that understands death lives under its shadow. This may be why ancient myths are filled with forbidden things. Forbidden knowledge, forbidden food, forbidden names, forbidden paths, forbidden chambers, forbidden tablets, forbidden immortal plants, forbidden attempts to cross the divine boundary. The danger is not only disobedience, the danger is awakening. To awaken is to see the limit, and once seen, the limit cannot be unseen. Mesopotamian scribes pressed their version of that awareness into clay. Egyptian priests painted it across tomb walls. Hebrew writers shaped it into covenant and wisdom. Greek poets staged it as tragedy. Persian teachers placed it inside cosmic struggle. Each tradition created a different map, but all stood before the same abyss. Why must beings who can ask eternal questions live inside bodies that fail? That is the shared human wound beneath the differences. Not a single doctrine, not one hidden tablet, not one secret disease named the same in every land. A recurring ancient recognition the human creature is divided between sacred longing and mortal flesh. And if these echoes appear across civilizations that imagined the gods in radically different ways, could the real awakening be something even deeper than disease, older than ritual, and hidden inside consciousness itself? What if the deepest sickness is not in the blood, the bones, or the breath, but in the moment a human being becomes aware? There is a kind of awakening that no ritual can reverse. It does not begin with fever. It does not require a demon at the door. It does not wait for old age. It can happen in childhood, in grief, in a dream, in the silence after burial, in the first sight of a parent's weakness, in the first understanding that every living thing is moving toward disappearance. The body was always mortal, but consciousness makes mortality personal. This may be one of the most haunting ways to interpret the ancient Mesopotamian fear of disease and fate. The texts themselves speak in the language of gods, demons, underworld powers, curses, divine decrees, and ritual impurity. They do not speak in the language of modern psychology. Yet modern interpretation can ask what these images reveal about the inner experience of being human. A person does not merely suffer. A person knows that suffering means something. A person does not merely age. A person watches age arrive. A person does not merely die. A person can imagine death long before it happens. This ability is both a gift and a wound. It allows memory, art, religion, planning, love, law, poetry, and civilization. But it also creates dread. Human beings can anticipate loss. They can grieve the future before it comes. They can fear what is not yet present. They can lie awake beneath a quiet roof and feel the weight of a fate no one else can see. Could this be the disease of knowing? Ancient Mesopotamian literature is filled with moments where wisdom does not bring peace. Knowledge is powerful, but it is also dangerous. The wise person sees patterns others miss. The diviner reads signs in the liver, the sky, the dream, the birth, the timing of an event. The ritual expert knows the names of forces that ordinary people fear. The scribe knows old stories of floods, kings, gods, and destruction. Knowledge opens the world, but it also fills the world with warnings. A sign is only frightening to the one who can read it. Imagine a man walking home at dusk. A bird crosses the sky in an unusual direction. A dog howls near a doorway. The moon appears with a strange halo. A dream from the previous night returns to his mind. Another person might ignore these things, but someone trained in omens cannot easily ignore them. The world becomes a tablet, and every mark may matter. This is not freedom. It is vigilance. The more a person knows, the more the universe speaks. The more the universe speaks, the less silent anything becomes. Illness, weather, birth, sleep, and accident all become possible messages. Life becomes meaningful, but not always comforting. This may explain the emotional weight of ancient divination and ritual knowledge. People wanted to know what the gods intended. They wanted warning before catastrophe. They wanted to identify danger before it struck. But every system of warning creates a new burden. The fear that one has missed a sign. What if the omen was there? What if the dream was not random? What if the pain was the first message? What if the god had already turned away? Consciousness makes the body into a place of interpretation. A sudden heartbeat in the night becomes a question. A pain in the side becomes a prophecy. A dream of the dead becomes a possible summons. A failed offering becomes a memory that will not leave. The mind circles the body, searching for meaning. Modern life has different language, but the pattern remains. A person feels a symptom and searches for explanations. A test result becomes an omen of another kind. A doctor's face is read like a priest's silence. The body becomes data, but data can frighten as much as myth. Knowledge still does not remove fear. Sometimes it gives fear sharper edges. The Mesopotamians lived in a world where knowledge was sacred because life was uncertain. Their scribes preserved lists, rituals, omens, lexical texts, myths, hymns, medical procedures, and royal inscriptions. This was not merely record-keeping. It was an attempt to hold reality in signs. To write was to resist chaos. To classify was to defend against the unknown. To name was to gain a small power over what might otherwise remain shapeless. But the unknown always remained larger. No omen series could contain every future. No healer could cure every patient. No king could interpret every sign correctly. No scribe could restore every broken tablet. No ritual could erase the final boundary. Knowledge expanded the world, then revealed how much of it stayed hidden. That revelation is painful. Perhaps the human mind is wounded by scale. It can imagine the gods, the underworld, the ancestors, the stars, the beginning of humanity, and the end of cities. Yet it lives inside one body, one breath, one span of years. The mind reaches beyond its container. The container fails to match the reach. A clay bowl cannot hold the sea. This tension may be the heart of the disease of knowing. Human beings are conscious enough to ask divine questions, but mortal enough to receive no final answer. They are aware enough to fear judgment, but limited enough to misunderstand the law. They are capable of memory, but surrounded by forgetting. They can preserve a name on clay, but cannot preserve the living voice forever. Ancient myths transform this condition into story. The gods possess decrees. Humans seek them. The gods know destinies. Humans guess them. The gods dwell beyond ordinary death. Humans descend. The gods may send signs. Humans struggle to read them. The human being becomes a listener in a universe that speaks through thunder, dream, illness, birth, silence, and ruin. But the language is never fully clear. Every answer opens another uncertainty. This is why consciousness can feel like an affliction, not because thought is evil, but because thought awakens distances between desire and limit, between body and eternity, between question and answer, between the living and the dead, between what humans can know and what they desperately need to know. And yet, this wound is also the source of human greatness. Without the disease of knowing, there would be no tablets, no hymns, no temples, no laments, no prayers whispered over the sick, no stories of creation, no maps of the underworld, no attempts to understand the gods. Fear becomes art. Mortality becomes ritual. Pain becomes language. The fragile body produces meaning precisely because it cannot last. Perhaps that is why the ancient scribes matter so much. They did not escape the condition they described. Their hands weakened. Their eyes failed. Their names often vanished. But they pressed questions into clay that still disturb the living. They turned consciousness into marks. They made anxiety durable. The hidden disease awakens when a person realizes they are not merely alive, but aware of being alive for only a little while. That awareness can become terror. It can become wisdom. It can become prayer. It can become obsession. It can become a civilization. But if knowledge itself deepens the wound, why did ancient healers believe that sacred words could still become medicine? Can a word heal what the body cannot understand? In ancient Mesopotamia, speech was never only sound. A word could bless, curse, summon, protect, accuse, purify, command, or release. The universe itself was imagined as responsive to names, formulas, divine titles, and ritual language. To speak correctly was not merely to describe reality, it was to act upon it. This is why sacred words stood at the center of healing. When illness entered a house, the sufferer did not need only medicine, the sufferer needed order. Pain had made the body strange. Fear had made the family restless. The house had become uncertain. The gods might be angry. A demon might be near. A ghost might be unsatisfied. A curse might be working in secret. A wrong act might have stained the patient without memory of the offense. In that confusion, ordinary speech failed. People could cry, whisper, beg, argue, and comfort. But ordinary speech did not reach far enough. It did not know the names of the powers involved. It did not know the correct path through danger. Sacred speech was different because it came from tradition, temple learning, and inherited authority. It was speech shaped to travel beyond the human room. Imagine the healer preparing the ritual. The patient sits or lies near a bowl of water. Oil gleams in a small vessel. A reed mat has been placed carefully. A figurine or symbolic object may stand nearby. The room smells of smoke, plants, and damp clay. The family watches each movement. Nothing feels accidental. Every object seems to carry meaning. Then the healer begins to speak. The words may call upon great gods. They may identify an evil force. They may describe the illness as something that must depart. They may compare the patient's release to a mythic event in which order overcame chaos. They may command the sickness to leave the head, the chest, the limbs, the blood, the breath, the bed, the house, and the threshold. The voice becomes a tool. The spoken formula gives shape to the invisible enemy. It says, "You are not nameless." It says, "You do not belong here." It says, "There are powers greater than you." It says, "This body must be returned." That act matters psychologically, ritually, and culturally. A silent illness traps the sufferer inside confusion. A named illness, or at least a named danger, can be confronted. The incantation creates a story in which the patient is not merely collapsing, but being defended. The family is not merely watching, but participating in restoration. The healer is not merely observing symptoms, but calling the world back into alignment. Could this be why incantations survived for so long? Not because every word always cured every disease. The ancient world knew failure. People died despite prayer. Bodies weakened despite offerings. Ritual experts could not conquer mortality. But sacred language gave suffering a form that humans could endure. It turned panic into sequence. It turned fear into action. It turned the sick room into a place where meaning was still possible. In Mesopotamian healing, the word often worked with material things: water washed, oil touched, plants treated, fire transformed, clay received, wool bound or carried. Food offerings restored relation. The word activated these materials inside a sacred pattern. Without speech, the object might remain ordinary. With speech, it became part of a ritual event. Water was not only wet, it became purification. Clay was not only earth, it became substitute, body, tablet, witness, or vessel. Oil was not only soothing, it became consecrating. Fire was not only heat, it became separation and transformation. The ancient healer lived in a universe where matter and meaning were joined. A thing could act because a word placed it inside divine order. The spoken formula told the object what role it now carried. Modern readers may see layers here. Some treatments may have had practical effects. Some rituals may have calmed the patient and family. Some prayers may have created emotional strength. Some symbolic actions may have helped people process fear, guilt, or grief. But reducing the ritual to psychology alone would miss its ancient power. For Mesopotamians, the word was effective because reality itself was relational. Humans, gods, demons, ghosts, objects, places, and names were connected. Speech moved through that connection. The sacred word could also protect before sickness arrived. Amulets, apotropaic figures, doorway rituals, protective incantations, and purification rites all reveal a world where danger might be blocked before it entered. Healing was not only reaction, it was defense. A house could be guarded. A pregnant woman could be protected. A child could be surrounded by ritual care. A traveler could carry protection into unsafe places. Why protect so carefully unless the world was full of openings? Every threshold mattered. The door of the house, the gate of the city, the mouth of the patient, the entrance to sleep, the passage into birth, the passage into death. Mesopotamian rituals often focus on these border places because borders are where danger and transformation occur. A word spoken at the border could close it, guard it, or guide the one crossing. The mouth was itself a threshold. Through it came breath, food, prayer, confession, and command. Through it could also come curse, insult, oath, falsehood, and dangerous speech. The same human faculty that could disturb divine order through noise could restore order through sacred formula. Speech was therefore double-edged. It could wound or heal. It could call disaster or avert it. That double nature makes language one of the most mysterious medicines in the ancient world. The healer's word did not remove the body's clay nature. It did not erase fate. It did not make humans immortal. But it created a moment of resistance. It stood between the patient and dissolution. It declared that the body was not yet surrendered to chaos. In this sense, sacred speech was medicine against meaninglessness. Disease isolates. The incantation reconnects. Pain confuses. The ritual arranges. Fear silences. The prayer gives voice. The body weakens. The word stands upright. This may be the most human part of the Mesopotamian healing tradition, faced with forces they could not fully control. People spoke. They named gods. They named evils. They named symptoms. They named hope. They believed that the right words, carried by the right person, in the right ritual moment, could reach beyond ordinary human helplessness. And perhaps they were preserving something essential about human beings. We are creatures who suffer, but also creatures who speak about suffering. We turn pain into cries, cries into prayers, prayers into texts, texts into memory. A fever passes or kills, but the words spoken beside it may survive. A healer dies, but the incantation can be copied. A patient disappears, but the ritual formula remains on clay. The sacred word becomes a bridge between the dying body and the enduring sign. This does not mean the word always cures. It means the word refuses to let illness be the only voice in the room. Against the silence of the underworld, the living speak. Against the secrecy of fate, the healer recites. Against the confusion of pain, the tradition offers a pattern. The disease inside humanity may be mortality, vulnerability, dependence, or the terrible awareness of limits. But the medicine of the sacred word reveals another hidden human condition, the need to answer suffering with meaning. A body can break, a word can remain, but if the words remained only because scribes pressed them into clay, what happens when the clay itself is broken, buried, scattered, and lost? What if the most important answer was written on a tablet that no longer exists? The ancient Mesopotamian world reaches us through fragments, broken corners, missing lines, half-preserved columns, tablets burned by accident and saved by disaster, texts copied by students who made mistakes, ritual series preserved in one city but lost in another, myths known from later versions that may carry older memories, names of gods preserved clearly, while the stories around them vanish into cracks. This is one of the greatest problems in studying ancient religion. The silence is part of the evidence. Modern viewers often imagine archaeology as the recovery of certainty. A buried object is found. A tablet is translated. A mystery is solved. But the truth is more difficult. Archaeology reveals, but it also exposes how much has disappeared. Every surviving tablet points toward libraries, temples, archives, houses, and schools that did not survive completely. Every translation contains decisions. Every broken line interrupts a thought that once made sense to someone. The ancient scribes knew things we do not know. They preserved rituals whose full performance is lost. They copied myths whose older forms may have changed. They used divine names whose emotional force is hard to recover. They assumed cultural knowledge that did not need explanation because everyone around them already understood it. For us, those assumptions are often the very things we most want to know. Imagine an excavation trench under the hard sun of Iraq. A worker's hand brushes soil from a lump of clay. At first, it looks like nothing. Then lines appear, wedge marks, a tablet. The object has slept underground for thousands of years. It is lifted carefully, cleaned, photographed, studied. The signs begin to speak again, but not completely. One side is damaged. The beginning is gone. A god's name is visible. Then a gap. A phrase about illness appears. Then a broken edge. A ritual instruction survives. But the final action is missing. The tablet does not give an answer. It gives a doorway. What was lost beyond that broken edge? This matters deeply for the mystery of disease in Mesopotamian thought. Surviving texts show many explanations: divine anger, demons, ghosts, curses, impurity, fate, omens, and the fragile nature of human life. But the full map of ancient belief is gone. There may have been local traditions never written down. There may have been temple teachings spoken only in ritual settings. There may have been household practices too ordinary for scribes to preserve. There may have been myths known in one city and forgotten before another scribe could copy them. What we possess is not the whole civilization. It is a surviving constellation. The temptation is to fill the gaps with imagination. That temptation is dangerous. It creates false certainty. It invents tablets that were never found, translations that were never made, secrets that no evidence supports. Responsible storytelling must resist that. Ancient mystery is powerful enough without fabrication. The real fragments are already haunting. A missing line is not permission to invent. It is an invitation to wonder carefully. Consider how much depends on preservation. Clay tablets can endure, but only under certain conditions. Some were baked intentionally. Others were hardened accidentally when buildings burned. Many dissolved, broke, scattered, or were reused. Wooden writing boards, leather, wax, textiles, and spoken traditions could disappear almost entirely. Ritual gestures performed by priests may leave no trace except a brief instruction. Music, tone, smell, movement, fear, and expectation vanish first. Yet these vanished elements were part of the ancient experience. A healing incantation was not only marks on clay, it was a voice in a room. It was timing. It was breath. It was the patient's face. It was the family watching. It was water poured at the right moment. It was the silence after the final word. The tablet preserves the skeleton of the ritual, but not its living body. That loss changes how we understand the ancient disease. Texts can tell us what was written, but not always what was felt. Archaeology can reveal houses, graves, temples, drains, tools, bones, and tablets, but it cannot fully restore the sound of a mother praying over a feverish child, or the terror of a king waiting for an omen to be interpreted, or the doubt of a healer whose ritual might fail. The missing evidence is human. This is why the last tablet is always missing in a symbolic sense. Even when a text is complete, the world around it is not. The ancient reader knew the god's festival. The modern reader reconstructs it. The ancient patient feared a named demon with cultural immediacy. The modern reader analyzes the demon as part of religious history. The ancient scribe copied a line because it mattered inside a tradition. The modern scholar asks why. Between them lies an abyss of time, and yet the fragments still speak with astonishing force. They show that illness was never small. They show that the body was connected to divine order. They show that humans feared hidden causes. They show that healing required knowledge, ritual, and material action. They show that mortality stood behind every prayer. They show that ancient people did not passively accept suffering, but answered it with words, offerings, diagnosis, purification, and myth. What remains unknown is the center. Did some priestly schools teach a deeper theory of why humans were vulnerable? Did local Sumerian traditions preserve myths about disease that vanished before later copies? Did ordinary families speak of sickness in ways that never entered formal tablets? Did ritual specialists possess oral explanations for the awakening of affliction that were lost with their lineages? No one can honestly claim certainty. That uncertainty should not weaken the mystery. It should deepen it. Because the broken archive mirrors the human body itself, a tablet can be damaged like flesh. A line can be lost like memory. A sign can survive while the voice behind it disappears. Clay preserves and fails at the same time. It is durable enough to cross millennia, but fragile enough to break in the hand. The same material that gave us the ancient texts also reminds us of their incompleteness. A clay tablet is never just information. It is a survivor. Some tablets survived because cities burned. Some survived because they were buried. Some survived because someone copied them from older tablets before the originals disappeared. Survival itself is accidental, selective, and strange. The ancient world we study is partly the result of catastrophe. Fire destroyed buildings, but hardened clay. Collapse buried libraries, but protected texts. Ruin became preservation. This is one of archaeology's deepest paradoxes. We know some things because disaster interrupted them. We hear ancient voices because their world ended in ways that accidentally saved fragments of speech. So when we ask what the Sumerian and Mesopotamian texts reveal about the disease inside humanity, we must accept an uncomfortable truth. The evidence does not hand us one final sentence. It gives us patterns, symbols, names, rituals, and fears. It gives us clay bodies, divine decrees, underworld messengers, sacred words, fragile kings, drought, plague, demons, and fate. It gives us enough to sense the shape of an ancient question, but not enough to close it forever. Perhaps that is fitting. A complete answer would make the mystery smaller. The brokenness keeps it alive. The ancient scribes wrote against forgetting, yet forgetting still won part of the battle. Their tablets remain, but not all of them. Their words survive, but not every word. Their world speaks, but always through cracks. And if the final explanation of human suffering was lost with a broken tablet, a vanished ritual, or a voice no one copied, then what can be said when all the surviving fragments are placed together one last time? What if the ancient sickness was never one thing? A modern title can make it sound simple. Sumerian texts reveal a disease placed inside every human being. The phrase is powerful because it feels like a secret finally uncovered, a hidden diagnosis buried in clay, a forbidden truth that survived beneath ruined cities. But the ancient evidence is stranger than that. It does not give a single name, a single tablet, or a single medical answer. It gives a pattern. Human beings are made fragile. They are formed from earthly substance. They serve divine purposes. They multiply. They become noisy. They suffer plague. They fear demons. They appeal to gods. They descend toward the underworld. They search for hidden causes. They speak sacred words over bodies that may not recover. They write everything they can into clay, as if memory itself were a medicine against disappearance. The mystery is not less powerful because it is not literal in a modern medical sense. It is more powerful because the ancient texts are not describing only sickness. They are circling the condition that makes sickness terrifying. They are asking why the human body, from birth, already belongs to a world where pain can awaken without warning. They are asking why flesh can be strong in the morning and helpless by night. They are asking why a creature capable of prayer, memory, labor, art, kingship, and love must remain vulnerable to fever, famine, fate, and death. This is where the first question returns. Why do human beings suffer? The Mesopotamian answers do not line up neatly like a doctrine. One text speaks through myth, another through ritual, another through lament, another through omen, another through medical instruction, another through royal fear. One tradition imagines plague sent when humanity becomes too numerous and loud. Another places bodily weakness close to creation itself. Another gives disease the face of demons or messengers from the underworld. Another seeks relief through incantation, washing, offerings, and sacred names. Each fragment reveals a different side of the same shadow. To ancient scribes, illness was not a meaningless accident inside an empty universe. It was connected to powers, divine anger, fate, impurity, ghosts, curses, the imbalance of the city, the failure of ritual, the dangerous nearness of death. These explanations do not match modern science, and they should not be treated as substitutes for it. But they reveal something history alone cannot ignore. Ancient people experienced suffering as a message demanding interpretation. A fever was never only heat. A failing body was never only flesh. A silent house was never only grief. The body was a tablet the unseen world could write upon. Yet the texts also resist simple cruelty. The gods may send disasters, but the divine world also contains wisdom, help, and hidden counsel. Enki can teach survival. Ritual specialists can act. The ISU can prepare treatments. The Ashipu can speak against invisible forces. Families can pray. Water can purify. Oil can soothe. Words can defend. Offerings can restore relationship. The world is dangerous, but not always closed. This tension is one of the most human truths in Mesopotamian religion. People feared fate, but still appealed. They feared demons, but still named them. They feared divine anger, but still prayed. They feared death, but still cared for the dead. They knew the body could break, but still wrote on clay. That last image may be the key. A clay tablet and a human body belong to the same symbolic universe. Both are formed from earth. Both receive impressions. Both can be broken. Both can carry meaning. But the tablet can survive what the hand cannot. The scribe dies. The sign remains. The voice disappears. The question endures. Perhaps this is why the ancient Mesopotamian archive feels so haunting. It is not only that the tablets speak about mortality. The tablets themselves are proof that humans fought mortality with memory. Every wedge pressed into clay says something in us knows we will vanish, and something in us refuses to vanish completely. So what was the disease? If we speak strictly as historians, there was no single known Sumerian tablet that names one universal biological illness placed into every human. That claim would go beyond the evidence. But if we speak as interpreters of myth, symbol, and ancient religious imagination, then several possibilities emerge. The disease may be mortality. The body is born already moving toward death. The disease may be vulnerability. Every human form is open to forces beyond control. The disease may be dependence. No person survives apart from water, grain, family, city, land, ritual, and powers greater than the self. The disease may be fate. A decree waits for every life, even if no one knows when it will speak. The disease may be consciousness. Humans do not merely die. They know they will die, and that knowledge changes everything. Each answer is incomplete alone. Together, they form the ancient wound. This wound awakens at different moments. It awakens in the sickbed. When the body becomes unfamiliar, it awakens in famine. When the field no longer feeds the city, it awakens in infertility. When the future seems to close, it awakens in royal terror. When even a king learns that a crown cannot protect breath, it awakens in mourning. When the living realize the underworld has taken someone by name, it awakens in knowledge. When a person understands that the same road waits for everyone, and once awakened, it cannot fully sleep again. That is the true horror and the true wisdom of the ancient texts. Human beings live much of life as if health is normal and death is an interruption. But Mesopotamian myth suggests the opposite. Health is the temporary balance. Breath is the temporary gift. Order is the temporary victory. Disease, decay, and death are not intruders from nowhere. They are reminders of the limit built into clay. Yet this is not a message of despair. It is a message of scale. The ancient scribes did not have modern medicine, but they had extraordinary seriousness. They understood that suffering required more than reaction. It required story, ritual, memory, community, and speech. They created ways to stand beside the sick, mourn the dead, interpret disaster, plead with gods, and preserve questions for descendants they would never meet. Their world is gone, but their questions are not. Every hospital room, every whispered prayer, every diagnosis, every funeral, every fear in the middle of the night carries an echo of the same ancient realization. The language has changed. The gods are no longer named in the same way by most people. The demons have become metaphors for many. The body is now studied through cells, organs, pathogens, genes, and chemistry. But the deepest human question remains painfully familiar. Why does the body fail when the person inside still wants to live? That may be why these old myths continue to move us. Not because they give scientific answers, but because they preserve the emotional truth of being human. The ancients knew that suffering is never only physical to the one who suffers. It reaches memory, guilt, hope, fear, family, society, and the sacred imagination. It forces the living to ask what kind of world they inhabit. Maybe the disease the gods placed inside humanity was not a curse in the crude sense. Maybe it was the boundary that makes humans human. The gods, in Mesopotamian imagination, possess powers beyond ordinary death. Humans possess clay, breath, hunger, memory, and longing. We are not beasts because we ask why. We are not gods because the question does not save us from dying. We stand in between, wounded by awareness, dignified by search, terrified by silence, and driven to leave marks behind. That is the final power of the tablets. They do not close the mystery. They keep it open. Whether these ancient stories preserve religious beliefs, symbolic teachings, ritual fears, or humanity's earliest attempts to understand suffering, they continue to raise a question that no civilization has ever fully escaped. The scribes pressed their answers into clay, but the clay broke. The gods were named, but their intentions remained hidden. The rituals were spoken, but not every body was saved. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this: the ancient sickness awakens not when we become ill, but when we finally understand that we were mortal all along.